so we have 10 items. I hope is that we won't get to most of them. We put them in there just because of urgency and some were coming back, but I'm assuming we're only gonna get through maybe item number 5 or 6. And then we'll push the rest to the next meeting, which will be somewhere early December.
Okay, start date. So everybody should start joining right now.
Okay,
And I'm gonna start promoting everybody.
thank you.
Who else do we need to promote? Jose Espinosa,
Yeah, and Catherine.
Michelle Milford.
No.
No, okay.
No, just you need that one.
Hi, good evening.
Was it looking for Rochelle Forrest?
I'm accessing the wrong
Did you go to the agenda?
link.
That's weird. Oh, you know what? Wait, no, that's weird. I don't see you at all.
Anybody
Yeah, we're
else?
kind of over. We're already, yeah, it's already past the time we needed to.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, so it's late anyways.
If you check your chat,
Dr.
I
Moses,
So-
just chatted
I
you the
sent you
What's the
that email
consequence?
that we were talking about earlier.
I
That we've been
forwarded
trying,
it.
this is the one we've been trying to get going.
Look on your own time frame. It's like a sit on the toilet type of look.
So
It's
what
not an
now?
emergency.
We should review
We should what?
Does somebody
it. Girl,
have,
wake up.
does somebody have Director Forrest's number to see if she can get in?
Sorry. This is why I'm not supposed to sit next to Lashante.
Listen, y'all are terrible students. Terrible students.
She looked at me like I was the crazy one.
Y'all both are like terrible students. All right, so we need, who are we missing on here? Rochelle and
Dr. Hurst.
Dr. Hurst and Rochelle.
But he's here in person,
So
so why
he-
don't we
he's
just get
fine.
started? Is that okay?
Dr. Hurst,
I
can you
forwarded it
text
to you on
Rochelle?
email.
Oh,
for
an
us and see
email.
if she can jump on? Dr. Hurst is on now.
Click on that.
And we're recording. We're ready? Okay.
We started about that.
Oh, awesome.
I had to start it so everybody could log in.
Oh, okay.
If we don't start it, then nobody pulls.
Got it. Don't worry about it. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our governance meeting. We're gonna start with roll call and introductions. Dr. Hurst, could you please take roll call?
Absolutely. President Smith Folds,
Good afternoon, everyone present. Sorry, good evening, everyone present.
Clerk Gonzalez Hoy,
Present.
Catherine Acosta Proscos,
Present.
Dr. Moses,
Present.
Ashante Smith,
Present.
Francisco Ortiz,
Present.
Mark Mitchell,
Present.
Jose Espinoza,
Present.
Dr. Johnson,
Present.
Catherine Fleischman,
Present.
and then we also have Nancy Ortiz.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, now we're gonna move to our land and labor and body acknowledgements. First, with the land acknowledgement, we recognize that we are presently on the land so that Chucheño, Muwek, Makarka, and Ohlone peoples, and acknowledge them as the first inhabitants of the land we currently occupy. President, can you please do the body of the
Labor and body
labor and body
acknowledgement.
acknowledgement? Thank you.
Absolutely. I acknowledge that the burden of environmental exploitation and systemic injustice falls upon the labor of Black and brown bodies in the building of this country and its institutions. I remember that Black and brown people were born and died working this land against their will for generations. I also acknowledge the continued contribution of the labor of survivors over the centuries to today, of all immigrant labor, including voluntary, involuntary, trafficked, forced, and undocumented peoples in the building of what we refer to as the United States.
Thank you so much. Now we're gonna move to the purpose and outcomes of the committee. The purpose of our committee is to review policy, resolutions, things that need to be changed in those parameters for the district. Today we are reviewing 10 items that have to do with policy. We are now going to move to public comment. The public will have an opportunity to make public comment throughout the night in every discussion action item, as well as before we discuss the items. So that's this opportunity. The public will have 2 minutes per public comment, and we can open it up now. Please raise your hand if you would like to make public comment. Do we have any public comment?
No public comment at the time.
Okay. So we're gonna move straight into our first item. We are gonna try to get through as many items as possible. Whatever we don't get to is gonna get moved to our December meeting. We plan on having a meeting in early December. We're gonna start with, the first item is review of our sanctuary district resolution. This resolution was passed in 2016 out of response to political rhetoric that was occurring by the incoming administration. At the time was the Trump administration, especially against immigrant and people of color. Unfortunately, we are in the same place, 8 years later, where the narrative against people of color, immigrants, LGBTQ plus communities has continued, and we want to reinforce our position for our students and our community. So we are going to review changes to our sanctuary district resolution, which they're attached to the agenda. The changes we are recommending are in yellow. So I'll ask someone from staff to please share their screen so that we can review the changes. And then after we review the changes or we go through them, we'll open it up for public comment. And then after that, we'll start discussion and whether or not we want to move it forward to the full board or we have more changes. Anything you'd like to add before we start looking at the changes?
No, I just think that this is a very important resolution, and I want to make sure that we give it our all. I don't think that language can be strong enough in this resolution, so I'm looking for the strongest language possible to make our stance very clear to everyone that's in WCCUSD, who we are and who we're going to stay and remain. I'm complete.
For context, we did send this resolution obviously to our staff, but then also to our labor partners and a few community organizations that provided feedback, including the Rice Youth Center, the Latina Center, Healthy Richmond,
Dr. Rogers Art.
Dr. Rogers Art, and I'm forgetting one. Oh, Go Public Schools. And they all either some of them provided direct feedback, and then some of them didn't, but showed support for some of our changes. So why don't we start and go through it? One of the pieces that we got as feedback was the title of the resolution. So to make it a little bit more inclusive to really what we're trying to do, I made the change that's written on the top, in support of our students, staff, and families, regardless of race, gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, or immigration status. Like I mentioned before, originally this resolution was heavy on the immigrant piece because in 2016, the narrative or rhetoric was specifically against the immigrant population and what the incoming administration was going to do to remove immigrants, especially around the school system. This time around, the president and I wanted to be a little bit more inclusive of other communities that are being impacted by the rhetoric on the national level and even local level. So the first few paragraphs in yellow have to do with support for our LGBTQ plus community, and then specifically also calling out the race, which is obviously a large issue that we're currently facing. I don't know if we want to read every single one, but I wonder if it might be helpful. What do you think?
I mean, we're doing pretty good. We could. Yeah, you want to? I could read it.
Yeah.
Some of them, let's see.
Okay, I'll ask the president to read the yellow ones.
All right. Whereas it is the right of every child, regardless of race, gender identity, gender, oh, my hot mess, what's happening? Oh, yeah, because, I can't see it. Uh-oh. Now you can't find it, because, I can't, you can't see it now, because I had.
Oh, my goodness. I'm
There
sorry.
we
man. I was trying to be helpful and I ruined it.
Oh, there it is.
There you go.
Great, now I can keep my glasses on, and I can turn my camera back on, because it was like, why does she have glasses? Okay, here we go. Whereas it is the right of every child, regardless of race, gender identity, gender expression, or sexual orientation, to access a free and public K through 12 education, and the district welcomes and supports all students. And whereas the district has a responsibility to ensure that all students who reside within its boundaries, regardless of gender identity, gender expression, or sexual orientation, can safely access a free and public K through 12 education. And whereas the district recognizes that there are employees and educators of the highest caliber who are gay, lesbian, and transgender, and that all employees are valued members of the school community, regardless of their gender identity, gender expression, or sexual orientation. And whereas the district recognizes that families in our community come in many different forms, and the district values all of our families and students, caregivers, regardless of race, gender identity, gender expression, or sexual orientation. And whereas California law prohibits discrimination, including discrimination based on race, gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation. And whereas in the landmark opinion of Bostock versus Clayton County, decided on June 15, 2020, the United States Supreme Court recognized that discriminating on the basis of actual or perceived sexual orientation or gender identity is always a form of sex discrimination. And federal law prohibits sex discrimination in employment and education. And whereas the United States Department of Education and the U.S. Department of Justice have recognized that the Supreme Court's reasoning in the Bostock decision applies to Title IX of the Education Amendment of 1972, Title IX, and that Title IX prohibits discrimination against and harassment of students and school employees based on their gender identity and sexual orientation. And whereas Title IX and other federal civil rights laws prohibiting discrimination on the basis of race, gender identity, and sexual orientation preempt local and state laws that conflict. And failure to comply with these requirements of Title IX may jeopardize the district's federal funding. And whereas the West Contra Costa Unified School District is a diverse community with 54.3% of its students being Hispanic or Latino heritage, 12.5% African American, 10.9% Asian or Filipino, 10.5% white, and 4.9% Filipino, and 6% two or more races. That's the highlighted stuff. We said Filipino twice.
Yeah, we did. I'm gonna write it, yeah. Could you just keep scrolling, Dr. Hurst?
Yes.
And then, whereas the West Contra Costa Unified School District Board of Education passed a similar resolution on December 16, 2016, and this resolution reaffirms our commitment to family, students, and staff. And now, therefore, be it resolved that the West Contra Costa Unified School District Board of Education urges the federal government and the future Trump administration to enact humane, comprehensive immigration reform that includes a path to citizenship and keeps families together in the United States. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the district prohibits discrimination against all persons, whether student, family caregiver of a student, or district employee on the basis of race, actual or perceived sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression, or the actual or perceived sexual orientation, gender identity, immigration status, or gender expression of their associates. You gotta scroll down a little bit, please. Be it further resolved that the district prohibits bullying and harassment against all persons, whether student or district employee, on the basis of race, actual or perceived sexual orientation, gender identity, immigration status, or gender expression, or the actual or perceived sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression of their associates. Be it further resolved, the board and the district commit to continuing the work of anti-racism, knowing the historical and current state of the country, knowing that the historical and the current state of the country cannot be ignored. the intentional terror for Black students, parents, staff, and community members in the American school system is abusive. The West Contra Costa Unified School District Board of Education stands in direct opposition to the educational abuse. WCCUSD declares that every school site or office of the West Contra Costa Unified School District is a safe place for all Black students and their families, and that the students and their families can come to any district school or office to seek help, assistance, and information about racialized harm. Be it further resolved, the district shall allow students and staff to use requested names and pronouns without requiring a legal name change or medical diagnosis. Provide equal access to all programs and facilities, including access to bathroom and locker room facilities as needed for all students and staff that align with the students and staff members' gender expression. And provide at least one gender-neutral bathroom. Respect the privacy of all students, all staff and students who are in transition, and allow students to participate in all physical education, athletics, and other extracurricular activities according to their gender identity, without requiring legal or medical documentation. Be it further resolved that any dress code for district employees or students should be gender neutral. The superintendent will implement The superintendent will implement an administrative protocol, if not already in place, that sets expectations and guidance for any district engagement with ICE, as well as execute adequate training of district personnel to ensure that district practice is congruent with the spirit of this resolution. Be it resolved, the board affirms that certificated district employees have the academic freedom to discuss this resolution during class time, provided it is age appropriate, and students are to be made aware that district counselors are available to discuss the subjects contained in this resolution. I am complete.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That's great. Okay, before we move to discussion, and we already caught some changes that need to happen, why don't we open it up for public comment, if there are any?
No public comment at the time.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, why don't we open it up for anyone on the table that would like to have discussion on the resolution, or who has changes they would like to propose? Francisco?
Yeah, I just want to appreciate the inclusivity and the update to the resolution, because especially as we know that the incoming administration is targeting our most vulnerable students, especially our students from the LGBTQIA+ community. The only other edit that I would add to this is into the see it further resolved. I think it's on the third page. When referring to Black students and Black families, I think we should capitalize for all the other.
That's what I was gonna say.
And then the last part, the number 8 superintendent will implement an administrative protocol is not already in place. My question is, do we have one in place, or can we just, I'm not sure how number 8 conflicts with the other points that were included in the class date for the result. I think it's like number 4. Number 3, number 5, and number 6. So to me, those at least read to me like our district is not going to cooperate with ICE. It's not going to cooperate with immigration enforcement agencies, and it's not going to allow immigration enforcement to happen in our schools or in our work sites. And so I'm wondering how number 8 either builds off of that, or it's counterintuitive to those other points that we're making in this last resolution.
Thank you.
Mr. Ortiz, we're just trying to capture everything that you said, recommendations. I'm not sure if we caught everything. Can you go by the paragraph maybe and direct us
Yes.
what changes?
So the first one was
Capitalized Black.
capitalized Black and referring to Black students, Black families. I think on page 2.
Yeah, it's like number 13 of the highlights.
It's in one of the be it further resolved. So it's fourth, be it further resolved.
Number 4.
It's actually on the second page, I lost it. The second one on the second page, the second highlight on the second page. Did you find it?
Where we commit to continue the work of anti-racism.
Mhm,
The intentional care of the black
Mhm.
students. that black-
mhm,
And then going further to safe for Black students.
mhm, mhm. And then Mr. Ortiz wanted to know if the protocols around how to deal with ICE, if it come to our school, if they're already in place, and if you know that answer.
I don't answer.
I do recall in 2016, the superintendent at the time and staff did work on things. I just don't know what they are. So I think that we do have to
We
follow
can
up with,
find out.
yeah, which is why I put the, if not already in place, because I do recall there's already protocols that were developed. But if not, that we do want those protocols to be developed. And-
I specifically remember discussing this topic at principal's meeting, getting direction on how to proceed. I can look back at my notes as well.
That'd be great.
Okay.
I just want to name that they were also, given that that situation was new, this is our second time around, had an opportunity to maybe do it a little cleaner. As a member of the labor union, as this was being rolled out, lots of our administrators were afraid that they would be caught in the middle of what the district has asked and what the law demands. So just want to ask that whatever those protocols are, that we run them by legal
Yeah.
to make sure that we can reassure our administrators that we are not putting them in a position to be arrested.
Yes, Mr. Espinosa.
So the district does have a board policy 5145.13. It's response to immigration enforcement, and that does discuss information in regards to immigration enforcement on campus or if law enforcement comes on site.
What's the board policy, isn't it?
Board policy 5145.13.
Great, thank you, that's helpful.
I think another
Clerk.
direct.
Mr. Flashman, go ahead.
Yes, I had a couple of questions. Given that one of the things that people are often bullied on is regarding disability, and I did see disability mentioned, I did see bullying mentioned in here a significant amount. I think that we should add language regarding disability for students, educators, and family members. Also, given the last Trump presidency, there was a immediate Muslim ban early in his presidency. And given the rhetoric just today from the person he's put in charge of immigration, where they said with democratic states, we will find you and we will come get you, I think that we may want to also include language around religion in this board policy as well.
May I ask Director Flashman a question?
Yes.
How do we phrase disability? Do we say disability or is there a better way of saying it?
I think we give it to Mr. Flashman
To add
to
his
add the
whereas
language that we
and,
think is
okay.
most appropriate. If that's okay with you,
I
Mr.
think that's
Flashman,
good.
we will just agree
Sure,
that that language needs to go in, and then we'll let you come through it and just add those important pieces to it.
Okay. I mean, I think it will be as simple as disability. And so all those places where it lists protected groups, I would also add disability, but I can take a look at the language. Is there an editable version that you'd like me to work on and send back to you or?
That is a good question.
We have a copy.
You have a
We'll get
copy?
it to 'em.
Okay,
Okay. Thank you, sir.
thank you, Mr. Flashman.
Yeah.
And great additions.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mr.
So in
Spence.
regards to Mr.
And-
Fleischman's question, within the protected characteristics, we do identify disability as physical or mental disability within the characteristics.
Mm.
So that's on the non-discrimination harassment language.
I like
Is that this thing?
No, that's,
that
this is a
something-
separate policy.
Okay,
Mhm.
But that's
Like the bullying
typically the language that we
Oh, okay.
use in regards to protected characteristics within the district.
Mm. Great. Can we send it to Mr. Espinosa too?
Yes.
Thank you, thank you. I think your lenses are really important. Okay, great addition so far. Anyone else?
I'm wondering about, so it says, that be it further resolved that the district prohibits bullying and harassment against all persons, whether student or district employee. Do our board members fall into district employees, or should that be named?
I mean, we get paid through the district, so I would assume that, Dr. Johnson, would we be considered district employees as board members because we get a district check?
Yes.
Okay,
So then you're covered.
I mean, we bully each other.
Yeah, but that's a good point. Thank you. Want to make sure everybody is included. I did want to change one paragraph. If we can go to, I need to find it now. Sorry. The one where it describes staff, and then there's sexual orientation.
Is it whereas or
I
a?
think it was a whereas. Oh, here it is. Okay. It is on the first page, the third paragraph in yellow. It says, the district recognizes that there are employees and educators of the highest caliber who are gay, lesbian, and transgender. I just realized that like we accidentally left off potentially other orientations. So I wonder if we want to maybe just make it more inclusive by writing something like,
Who identify as LGBTQ.
yeah, who
Yeah.
identify as part of the LGBTQ plus community.
I think that would be cleaner.
Mhm,
I
mhm.
think it would be cleaner. So you're saying, whereas the district recognizes that their employees and educators of the highest caliber who identify as LGBTQU plus, right? And that all employees are valued members of the school community regardless of their gender identity, gender expression, or sexual orientation.
Mhm,
Okay,
mhm.
I like that.
Thank you. Then under the paragraph of the demographics, which is the first on the second page, we did write 10.9%. It should say Asian, so we can delete that first or Filipino. Because then Filipino we call out specifically for the 4.9.
Gotcha.
Just grammatical, like there's a percent after the 4.9%, and then all of the others.
Don't have
Right.
percent fine.
Great.
So it needs to
Sorry.
be 54.3,
Yeah.
the percent sign
Either percent or
or the
percent.
It's
number,
percent
Yeah.
to
okay,
be
or
good
the letter,
consistent.
the
Yeah.
word,
Just-
okay.
So we stick with the word.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then delete the symbol.
So are we 10.9% Asian and then 4.9% Filipino? Okay. Okay.
Which I know this is like federal classifications, but members of the Asian community also say that it is not equitable to lump
Mhm.
them all into the Asian race, as there's many minority races in the Asian population that actually don't get represented when you just lump Asians all together. That's
Mm.
just my comment.
We have that conversation at Hercules all the time because it's East Asian. It's like the way that, and then it's Filipino. It's just the way that, and I think that I know as a board member, I don't understand the breakdown enough
Mhm.
to speak from it from a place of intelligence, but I want to know. So I had a conversation with Dr. Moses today about like, why do we do that?
Mm.
Why is it in some of our data, we say we
Yeah.
separate East Asian and Filipino. In some of our data, we just put everybody as Asian. And how do we delineate that? And to your point, how are we conscious
Mhm.
about how that impacts somebody else? Are we making sure that we're seeing everybody and listening and valuing everyone in one lump category?
Mhm.
I have the same question about Hispanic and Latino. I don't understand, I don't have enough understanding around what that looks like. And just to be clear, I damn near don't have it around African Americans, because we put Haitians in that group too, and I was like, well, so it's just to understand.
Well, these are the classifications under
Federal.
CASP, well, I got it from CASP. But is there a better way to do it that anyone recommends?
Well, I think the problem is when we take our demographic data, it's already, there's only certain things you can like click. But I've had families, we have a larger Mian population, Hmong population, and, but it's not represented because there's just not an option.
I was quite surprised how many Laotians we have at Hercules.
The other thing is, it's kind of related to this resolution. I've been thinking about this. We don't collect data around LGBTQ status for students. And so there's been some recent districts who began collecting that data because it's important to look at their data very specific to that group of students. And because we don't collect that, sometimes we're not focusing more intentional policies and practices to support that student group.
Any other thoughts from anyone?
Thank you for this.
Yeah. That's excellent.
Okay, well then I think that let's add all those changes, and then we can discuss. I think that I would propose and would like for it to be placed on the board agenda for the 18th of December, if possible. The reason why is because I think that symbolically, it would be good if the new board as a team was to make this reaffirming to the community. I know it's waiting and the narrative is happening currently, but since the new administration also doesn't take office until January, do we think that's okay?
Yes, and I'm nervous
Me too.
because on December the 18th, I just don't know the temperature of everybody on the board. I can hinge my bets that if this comes before, then it's gonna pass with ease, because we have to rule by majority and all of that. I don't know if we wait that it's not gonna be picked apart. And some of the things that we find very important in here will not be, I make a motion to revision, and then I'm gonna pull this out, and it turns into a 5-hour conversation. And the spirit of it and the reality of it gets lost. I think with the current board that we have now, I think the strength of the resolution gets passed without deletions or additions. And besides what Director Fleischman is gonna add and others are gonna add, that's my fear. So I just wanna name my fear, and that I believe because all documents are living documents, if we have to come back, we come back, but I would love it to be passed at the next board meeting. That's my point. Dr. Hurst is saying.
I was just gonna say, typically, the second board meeting in December is typically a light agenda. Just because it's right before the holiday. I think this is a very meaty conversation, especially for new board members. And to echo what the president was saying, I think putting 2 new board members into this conversation, it's gonna be a lengthy conversation. They're gonna ask a lot of questions, which may be okay. But if your intent is to make the board meeting light, I don't think it'll be light with this particular topic.
Well, I think that we might, well, who knows, right? We don't know, but I think that we might also have potential opposition and a lengthy conversation with our current board.
I think we will
Right,
too.
so I think it's more of like, I would like to think about like, what is it that we're trying to accomplish? If it's with this board or it's the next one, I'm okay with whatever decision you'd make. But I think that if it doesn't get passed with a new board, I think we have a larger problem.
Yeah.
That the community needs to be aware of.
I think
So-
that I agree with you.
Yeah.
I agree with you. However, I think that the community, whatever the board makeup becomes, the community is gonna be aware of that sooner or later. I don't want it to be off of the back of something so very important, not in lack of a better word, but off the back of something very important. I think that also this is a bow that we put on at the end of something that we have been doing so ferociously. And I think that listen, I think it's gonna be a long conversation. I think that some board members are gonna try to chunk it out and pull it apart, but I also think ultimately it will pass. I think it's gonna be, because I think that if you change anything, you have to have a second, and I'm not sure that, and then you have to have discussion and the vote or whatever. I just think that with the current board, we've been on that roller coaster, so the navigation is a lot easier than, hi, welcome to the board, this is your first vote. You remember our first vote was about charters? And I was like, because I was like, what am I doing? Like, how do I do it? So I think that this is something, that's just my personal opinion, but I do hear you. Just, this is gonna kill me. Dr. Hurst.
Just one more point of clarification. I think we had decided that we would take the policy from here and then put it on agenda for discussion first, and then for the next board meeting and go for a vote. So if it goes for the 18th, that means it wouldn't come back until January for the vote.
So if we discuss it on the 20th, if we put it down as a discussion item, which, you know me, friend, I think it should be under consent, but if we put it down for a discussion item, at least we can get a vibe of where we at, and then we have the board meeting on December the 6th, correct? December first, Wednesday in December. Compromise, does that work?
Well, I think that we need to think about it and continue the conversation agenda setting.
Okay.
Yes.
And I just think about, this is so fresh in our community and on top of mind for families. I think the sooner that we bring forward this conversation, the more calm the community will be about knowing that they stand with us together to protect and most vulnerable students and families. So
That's a
I
good
think
point.
the sooner the better that we can get this out.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, thank you, everyone. Okay, we're now gonna move to, you can stop sharing. Thank you, Dr. Hurst. We're now gonna move to item E2, the anti-slur policy. And I think Dr. Hurst, you're gonna
Yes.
introduce it.
So this proposed policy comes on the heels of our policy that was just recently approved by the board, our anti-racism policy. We've had continued conversations in our executive team meetings about racialized harm from our students and from our adults as well. This is a conversation that took place with the executive cabinet, and I instructed them to come up with a anti-slur policy, and we wanted to bring this policy to all of you to get your feedback. One of the things that we have talked about as well, myself and Dr. Moses, is we may want to run this also by legal counsel because this is fresh off the press. But I want to share with you, when you look at this policy, I highlighted key pieces so you can see clearly there's a commitment to fostering a safe and inclusive, respectful environment for all students. Also, what I like about this policy is that there's a policy aim, that the aim is to eliminate the use of harmful language, including racial slurs that may demean, marginalize, or inflict emotional harm on individuals based on any class. And then I really like the policy statement as well around being safe and responsible means being accountable for language and understanding the potential harm that it can cause. Also, you can see in this policy that the team went ahead and defined a slur. So not just speech, but also rumors, jokes, notes, stories, drawings, pictures, or gestures that make reference to a real or perceived ethnicity, national origin, immigrant status, religious belief, gender, sexual orientation, and the rest as well. And then also you can see what I like, it extends not just to verbal, but anything written also. And it also extends to digital communication. So we try to cover all those aspects. And then also we went further and say, not just on school grounds, but also during school activities. So even if they're at a contest, participating in a contest. And then I like further that it goes on and says in online interactions, and really addressing the social media piece as well, members of our school community. And then further it goes on, because sometimes we think about this just being between students. So in the kind of pinkish purple, you say a slur is towards any student. And we're also wanting to address adults as well. So student to student, student to adult, adult to adult as well. And then it goes on to say, all of the above is subject to disciplinary action. It does go into detail and it has guidelines and expectations. It talks about education and creating awareness, making sure that we have a reporting and response structure in place, that there's an investigation that takes place with accountability, support for those students who are impacted or affected, and then alignment to our policy, the commitment to anti-racism, and we have attached our policy as well. And then it goes on and it links it to our board policy around hate and motivated behavior, and it shares some consequences, and it includes, but it's not limited, so it's very clear that it's not limited to these, but it includes verbal warnings, educational interventions, counseling, restorative practices, and formal disciplinary measures as well. And then, of course, what was added was repeated severe violations may result in suspension or other disciplinary matters, actions. So we felt that we covered everything in the policy. And again, I would say this is something that's really important to me, especially on my way out, and wanted to bring that to this committee. If we feel, board president and clerk, that this needs to be run by legal counsel, we can do that as well. And then if there's any changes, of course, we can bring it back to the committee, but also would like to see this pass before the 18th of December.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Do we have any public comment on this one? We do.
No public comment at the time.
Okay, great. So let's open it up for discussion. Go ahead.
When we're talking about, we mentioned adults in it, and then, but we don't go as far as mentioning, are adults covered under that relearning, first warning, or are they on a separate discipline matrix than our students?
Depending on their labor contract.
So is that mentioned anywhere in here, or is that delineated anywhere, or is that just something that goes,
So I'm gonna lean on the team.
okay?
And ask Dr. Moses or any team member that was here, was there conversations about adults and consequences, or will we follow contract?
We have to follow contract, because we have different discipline matrix for each labor group, so.
So should that be mentioned in here, since there is a mention of this is also for adults not to do slurs? My question is, when you get down to the consequences, is that mentioned in here under, for adults, adults will be disciplined under their labor contract? I don't know. I'm just asking, was that thought about when you were having this cabinet discussion? Because if not, is it, we should absolutely, adults should have an anti-slur policy, right? You should not use any type of language that is demeaning or harming or creates racialized harm. The questions that come up in my head are an English teacher that's reading this book and they say the N-word completely out instead of just saying N-word, right? And students report that my English teacher said the N-word, and the English teacher says, well, I was reading Freedom Walkers. So it was in there, so I used it saying Freedom Walkers. And then where does the principal go from that? Does the principal go, okay, it's a verbal warning, don't say that anymore. It's, we use N-word instead of saying the complete word out, and this is why. So those are my questions.
So issues of concern with staff are driven by contract. I believe every contract though has a progressive discipline policy. And we use the Frisk manual to issue that discipline. And a part of the Frisk manual is what policy did you violate?
Okay.
So if there were an issue with a staff member that needed to be addressed, it would be addressed through the Frisk process, and this policy would be cited as the issue of concern.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be in the policy that we're gonna use the FIS management, progressive discipline, whatever. That's just what you refer to when the principal is having a conversation. Staff member B, you violated anti-slur policy 5537.2, and this is your first warning, or whatever that FIS management says is part of the progressive discipline. Okay.
I think Dr. Did
Anything
you
to
want to
add?
add something?
I saw you wrote down Frisk. I was like, don't put that in there.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
and I wouldn't want, it spelled out anyway, because those change during negotiations. It could be different a year from now, 5 years from now.
Okay. Thank you for that. That was all. I'm complete.
Thank you. Mr. Espinosa?
And when looking at this, I would see that we would need two different policies, one policy for students and one policy for employees. Typically, the students fall under the 5,000s and then employees fall under the 4,000s. And then if we have classified employees or certificate employees, volunteers, vendors.
That's a good point about the volunteers. Yeah, because what do you do with a yard supervisor, right? Or what do you do, or a parent volunteer that is doing yard duty? Like, what does that look like? And who owns that management of that? That's a very good point.
Mr. Mitchell?
So this comes up a lot in my work representing the certificated employees, unfortunately, quite a bit. And so there's different aspects of how this occurs. So I think we need to just be explicit about it. Like, as I mentioned, we have these different groups, but it's students that we want to hold to this standard of behavior. It's employees, right? It's visitors, and it's contractors. Because we have this come up in IEPs, right? Where they say crazy things about the teachers and folks working with the students. We have it happen when parents come to pick up their kids and they say stuff to other students or to our members of classified. And then the other piece that's not in here, and I don't know if you can do that, is just to say that it's also the responsibility of the person in charge to take action. Because what we've seen is, there'll be places where this is occurring a lot, and the people in charge are just like, they don't want to hear it because it's a lot to deal with, it's hard, it's uncomfortable, and they'd rather just act like it's not happening. And it takes a lot of work sometimes for us to get the people in charge to take the appropriate action. So I think there needs to be some mention of that. It's everybody's responsibility, including those in charge, to make sure that we uphold this standard that we're putting forth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then, sorry, just to Mr. Espinosa's point, the current policy we have for hate motivated behaviors is only under students, non-personnel. So that may be something we want to bring back to the governance committee so that it's covered in both areas. Just as we would probably need this anti-slur policy covered in both areas.
Francisco and Mr. Espinosa.
Thank you. Mr. Ortiz?
So just from my understanding, we didn't have any type of policy prior to the writing of this one that referred to slurs or, offensive language for, any protected class. There was nothing in the books for it prior to.
I mean, I think outside of what Title IX covers, I don't think so, right? Mm-mm.
No.
Yes, so we currently have the non-discrimination policy that protects certain characteristics. But specifically about slurs, it has to be within a specific criteria, severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive. So we have to identify what type of harassment and where that severity level has to be in order for it to violate that policy.
Yeah, and I would just echo what Mark was saying earlier, that's something that we heard a lot last week, especially that was something that was really pervasive, and, there wasn't substantive support for that.
And I like this policy because it doesn't have to necessarily be, it happened 10 times, right? This policy says if you're called a monkey once, there's an action to it. You get immediately something happening in your protection instead of having to be re-traumatized 10 times. And now it's the 10th time. And to your point, it goes to where now we don't have administrators having to do a tally mark. What's your 10th time? Now this happens. We take it to Title IX. It's like that discipline progressiveness is already in there, but we stop it at the gate, not here. This is not okay. So that's my comment on that. I'm complete.
Ms. Costa.
I wonder if we would be open to adding immigration status. So we have individual or groups based on race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, religion, ability, and other personal characteristics. So if we could potentially add immigration
I
status.
think that would be.
Yeah. Mr. Mitchell?
So one of the dynamics that's come up representing teachers in this situation is that they're often told, well, what did you do to address this situation? How did you stop it? Right? And just like the person who's the recipient of this racial slur should not be made responsible for fixing the problem by themselves or whatever, right? But that is something that
Definitely has a say in that.
Go ahead, Mr. Fleshman.
Thank you. I think in building off of what Mr. Mitchell just said, there are often times where the person in charge, like the principal, for example, may also be a member of that group that has been harmed. And so, I'm thinking in terms of, because it plays out the most frequently, our Black women principals being held to account for addressing something in which they were also harmed, right? And so I think there's just some nuance in that conversation, and I agree wholeheartedly with what Mark said as far as it being the responsibility of those of us in leadership positions to address these things when they come up, and acknowledging the fact that oftentimes our leaders are also being harmed directly by these comments, and how do we address and deal with that part of the conversation.
Thank you for that.
Can I add something else?
Yes.
I also want us to be aware or lift up that language is fluid. So if we stop the N word, what word replaces it? Because I'm gonna replace it. And then how fluid are we to how malleable is this policy to where we're like, okay, that's in this category or that's in this category. So the B word may be in here, but can you call somebody a slut or a whore, right? I'm more comfortable saying that out loud than the B word because there's striations in it, right? So looking at when we're talking about immigration, what does that look like? Because there's going to be now words and phrases that are around that to meant to harm, right? Meant to harm our students, our families, or whatever. So when we do roll this out, the education piece behind it has to be very heavy. And depending on your age group that you're talking to and the way you roll it out in your assembly, there has to be some exampling or some modeling about this is not okay. This word is not okay. You all know that you can't say this word, but I don't know if any of our students use the R word anymore. When we were growing up, if you were talking about somebody with a disability, you would use the R word, right? They may not use that anymore. They may use, well, slow. right? Do we consider that to be a slur, right? So it's having these conversations and having these conversations inside and outside of these groups, right? To make sure that we are creating what we want to create is as a safe space for students not to be demeaned. I'm complete.
Okay, so I have one question and then I have a comment. Do we need to, from Mr. Espinosa's comment, do we need to separate this policy between student and staff then?
Yes.
And then I'm assuming that then that will take time.
Yeah, I wrote that down.
So I wonder if then, because I know that we also have an urgency to bring this to the board, if we could bring the student one to the board first.
Yes.
And then bring the staff one after it's been reviewed. What do you think?
I think that that would, one, be very efficient. Two, I think passing one will help us pass the other, right? Three, I think to the point of the experts in the room, it makes sure that we keep a clean policy. So I think this policy should just refer to students. And then taking in what we hear from labor partners and taking in what we hear from HR and Mr. Espinoza, creating that more probably heavier policy around employees or adults, including our volunteers, including whatever, it's gonna look different. Contractors, labor partners, students, employees, et cetera.
And then my comment is, I do think that once this is passed, I do think that right away we have to send out an AR to staff that includes how to handle the different groups in case it's brought up. So what I mean is, if a parent or a visitor makes, says a slur, like how should a principal handle it? Because a lot of the time it's ignored also because they don't know how to handle it. And I'm referencing the principal here, but I think it happens with all of our staff, right? Because they might just not have the training. And your teacher probably doesn't know how to speak to a parent who comes to the classroom and makes a slur, right? Especially if they're just like volunteering. So I think that like also the level of in the classroom, like if a student says a slur, depending on the grade level, how should a teacher handle it? And what is the role of the teacher, the administrator, and the parent? I think that all that needs to be written out from expectations to like these are recommendations you can do, so that it doesn't open also the gates to like, oh, you used the word slow, so I'm suspending you, right? Like I could also see how that could hurt us at the same time as we're trying to fix the problem. So I think that all that needs to be written out before, or I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe like we gotta put this forward and then that comes later in collaboration and create that with educators, with principals. But I could also see it a problem and people not taking action onto this important policy because of the unknown and not knowing.
You're making me think about the resource that's necessary to repair harm, because if I was an educator and something happened in my room, I would want to be armed with tools about how to guide the conversation so that I'm not repeating words that are creating harm. And so I think that we've had examples of that happen in the district. And so I think it's a both and. It's a adoption of a policy that comes with a set of resources and tools. Otherwise, people aren't able to, or they make mistakes and cause more harm unintentionally.
Yeah, or even just who can I reach out to, right?
Yeah.
I could definitely see a well-intentioned teacher trying to fix it, but what if you're a white teacher and then you're in front of a group of Black students and you're trying to change the behavior? Let's say that the N-word is brought up. Like, how should that person handle it? I could see it. And without training, without the tools, I could see it going really wrong, right? Where it actually creates more harm to the people who are saying this, or not, but.
I think the benefit of having a policy is the teacher or whomever can point back to the policy. Yo, this is a district policy.
Yeah.
You can't say that. For me, as a volunteer, when I was a volunteer, my only word was language. And now, but language stopped it. If you just go language, you gotta stop it for the most part. And then now you can't cuss in front of me, you don't have no job. So it's one of these things that you got 3 kids and a cat and a husband, nope, then you should be cussing, I should be cussing. So it's like how you attack it, but you always attack it. Like there's never gonna be a time that I'm not gonna be like language, do this, but
Mhm.
To your point, though, that comes with training
Mhm.
and a lack of fear for engagement. I'm a Black woman, so my engagement to kids are that type of mama auntie figure that I'm not gonna get the same pushback that a white male teacher may get, but the white male teacher needs to be able to point to this policy too. Because if they start wilding out, they're like, oh, Mr. Beal, I can say, not according to this policy, you can't. So you take it up with the policy, because this is a board policy. So it's again, arming people, to your point, with the toolkit to be able to go, boop, 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 boop. This is not me, this is a school policy, this is a site policy, this is a board policy. Same thing that we do with all racialized harm. We point back to the adopted policy. I think Dr. Johnson had her hand up.
What you said is really important. What I heard was, or who can I talk to? And what happens is usually, who can I talk to would be someone who looks like you on the staff.
Right.
And that's not what we want to do. It's not who can I talk to, it's how can I address?
Yeah.
So if we equip everyone
Yes.
to be able to address that, then they're not looking for someone who looks like the student to help them because
That's
somehow they
right.
understand that student better.
That's
Yes,
right.
yes, and that can cause trauma, like
Yeah.
Mr. Foster mentioned, right?
Yeah.
Going to,
That I always have to be the Black person to talk about the N word.
right,
Can you talk to the 15 Black kids who said it? And I know that Ms. Catherine has a point. I also want to reiterate that when children are in fights, they say the most harmful thing that they can, right? When children are in this kind of tension, they say the most harmful thing that they can. So I think that we just need to be aware of that. If you're breaking up a fight, you're gonna hear it 15 times. That's not your main issue. Your main issue, they put hands on each other. So focus on that, and then we'll handle this. This is how you need to use your words, Billy, versus this part. So I think that that's kind of, we have to mess around with that too. Being a former high school teacher, if they said anything when they was in the fight, I was like, yo, you know what you just called that person? So I'm complete.
to cause them,
I don't know how to add this here, but there's a sense of needing language around a collective responsibility of addressing harmful language when we hear it, both from adults and students, that it's I'm an adult that works for the district and I walk and I hear a word and it's my responsibility, not necessarily to address it, but to report it, right? And I'm not seeing that yet in this policy, that it's, as district employees, we are responsible for not repairing the harm, for reporting it so that we can follow the guidelines and expectations.
I did capture that too.
and that will probably have to be added more to the staff one.
Mhm.
Ms.
Yes.
Smith, I forgot your last name for some reason, I'm sorry. I tried to whisper it, but.
Thank you. I was just gonna say kind of something along the lines of Ms. Acosta, to the point around adults who see students using the language and what is the responsibility of adults when we hear like, well, this is just casual talk, or this is just how our kids are interacting with each other. I've even heard like, well, this is just culture and they're gonna do it. And so there's kind of like no addressing it. And so I know that should probably be more in the staff one, but just wanting to make sure that we address that. And then just overemphasizing this education piece. I don't know if it's like strengthening the language here, but I think like with policies such as this, the actual implementation is going to really be contingent upon our ability to do trainings and provide staff with the resources, and then also the developmental appropriateness of the resources, because how you address it with the TK student, a kindergarten student, is going to be different than high school. So I don't know if it's language or if I'm just commenting right now, but I just don't want this to be a policy that kind of just sits on this paper, but I also want to like really push us as a district to really do that education that makes it come to life, so.
Mhm. Okay, well, really good conversation. I think, I mean, I'm okay with sending the student piece to the full board once we've added some of the changes that you
Yes.
heard tonight. And I think I would like to see the staff one come back to us.
Okay.
Would you be okay with
I
that?
think that student definitely needs to come. I think that it makes a affirming statement under
full
our
board, yeah.
anti-racism. Yeah, I think the student one needs to come to the full board as soon as possible, like the 20th. I think the staff one needs to come back because I think, again, once we have the momentum.
Yeah.
We cannot implement a student one without having a staff. It won't be, to Ms. Smith's point, it's not gonna come to life if we don't have that other piece, all those prongs in place.
And I think that to address your issue about, I know Dr. you wanted this to be part of your legacy.
Yes.
I think that we can also schedule our next governance meeting in early December so
Okay.
that we can have that conversation
And
before
bring
the
everything
first
back.
perfect.
Yeah.
board meeting.
Okay.
And then. Okay, great. Any last comments before we move on? Okay, wonderful. So let's move to item E3, which is the review of our current non-discrimination and harassment policy. And I think, Mr. Espinosa, you're gonna discuss this one, correct?
I'm not sure.
Oh, okay, never mind.
I think there were some edits, that the board wanted to bring up.
Oh, okay, this one. This one here?
Oh, wait, maybe it is, because this one has racialized harm.
Right, right.
That's
This
the
is
only
the
thing
one.
that I
Oh,
wanted to
yes.
add, was the
Yeah,
definition of
yeah,
racialized harm, yeah.
Would you mind putting that on the screen that first? Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Espinosa.
No, no.
It took me a minute.
Okay, well, I'll pass it on to you.
So at one of the governance meetings we had early on, when we brought back a change in language to the Title IX, the Title IX form in front of us, I wanted to bring about, well, how do we define racialized harm? Because it was under our anti-racism umbrella, and I believe, sent it off to Dr. Rogers R. for her to give us a definition about it, and then we said that we were gonna bring it back. Once we passed the Title IX correct or alteration or terms that we had in there, we were gonna bring back this with just the definition. So what you see in front of you is the definition of racialized harm. The governing board recognizes the impact of racialized harm and the racial trauma on the district's ability to provide such an environment. Racialized harm occurs when biased speech, conduct, or expressions are made against someone of another race. Harm can also occur when racialized slurs are used with schools by people of the same or different race. Racialized trauma refers to the mental and emotional injury caused by encounters with racial bias and ethnic discrimination, racism, and hate crimes. Any individual that has experienced an emotionally painful, sudden, and uncomfortable incident of racialized harm is at risk of suffering from racial trauma. That's what was added. I like it. I think that it is reinforcing everything that we're talking about. You see the racial slurs in here, and we just talked about the racial slurs over there. Dr. Johnson has her hand up.
The last question, the last sentence I pause on, any individual that has experienced an emotionally painful, sudden, and uncontrollable incident. I read that as if, well, it needs to be within these parameters to be racialized, to be at risk of suffering. I almost feel like an individual that has experienced racialized harm is at risk of suffering from racial trauma, regardless of if it was emotionally painful, sudden, or uncontrollable.
That's right.
I like that.
That's right.
I like that.
Yeah, I agree with you. Because I read it as like, if it's not uncontrollable, then I can't.
Yeah,
Okay,
Yeah.
I like that.
and who are we to define what that means to a person?
Right. I'm in agreement with that change. I think that change is necessary.
I was gonna ask who's capturing that.
She's captured, 'cause that was a lot.
Don't say much, but I do know.
That was good. That was good. I just didn't capture all.
Mr. Mitchell.
So in the first sentence where it ends, it says providing such an environment, and I'm not sure what that refers back to. If it's supposed to go to like the section above.
The governing board recognizes the impact of racialized harm and racial trauma on the district's ability to provide such an environment. Yeah, I don't know, sir.
To provide an environment free of racialized harm or something.
Where did this come from?
So this right here, where did the paragraph come from? Dr. Rogers Art,
Oh, okay.
right, Dr. Hurst?
Yes, it is.
Yes. Okay. I think adding what Mr. Mitchell said would work too.
Can you repeat it, Mr. Mitchell?
I suggested, the district's ability to provide an environment free of racialized harm.
Okay, thank you.
We got it.
Any other thoughts from anyone?
Just because,
Miss Smith, and then we'll go to Mr. Ortiz.
thank you. Just because we're updating the policy, I see Jose Espinoza in two places. One, he's listed as equity compliance officer, and then director, equity compliance officer, but then the section 504 coordinator, like just update that part. And does it make more sense just to adjust the, never mind, I'm doing too much. It's okay.
Come on, 13, do too much work.
Well, I was gonna say to put the racialized, like to add this part, the board prohibits after racialized harm and gender identity, because right here it says the board prohibits discrimination or harassment. It's like, it seems like the two sections are redundant here, so bringing this one down and bringing that up so that the language is clear.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
I think Dr. Hurst needs to be able to capture that.
Did you get that?
Oh, wonderful. Mr. Ortiz, and then we'll go to Mr. Espinosa, and then I have a comment.
Thank you. The policy that we're reviewing right now is in the 5,000 subject rank of students. Is there one also linked, I'm trying to scroll to the bottom, that is 4,000 for employees?
I've been scrolling, I haven't found a topic that matches this yet. There is one topic that I just reviewed. I think I lost it. It was professional. Professional. If I can find it.
The 4119. 4119.
Professional standards, yes. But professional standards is 4319.21, but it's very brief. It doesn't really say anything. So I don't know if it would go there, but I couldn't find anywhere else where it might be. And maybe it aligns with the anti-slave policy.
I think
Yeah.
you need to speak a little bit louder.
I don't think we captured
Oh,
yours.
sorry, I was saying that,
Also, Mr.
I reviewed professional standards, board policy 4319.21. I didn't see anything related to the expectation for, anti-racist, racialized harm. And, that it might be a good idea to add racialized harm to the anti-slur section of the staff, policy that we'll create in the future.
Yeah.
Mr. Espinoza.
So for that policy, I know there's 3 different versions. There's 411921, 421921, and 431921. So we would have to update all of them. As the language is consistent with them all. And then also for the revision of the 504 coordinator, we would have to update the section 504 coordinators to include, I believe the policy already has area 1 executive director, area 2 executive director. We would have to add area 3 executive director to Jose De Leon, and then we'll have it read consistent with AR 5145.3, which included the email addresses for all executive directors.
Well, looks like you're becoming a permanent member of this committee. And I actually really like the language in this resolution, in this policy, that I think maybe we could add to the first resolution we're discussing about tonight. If we look at 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5th paragraph, it's very, very inclusive of different groups. It's the big one. I'll give you all a second just to read through that.
You want me to read it out loud?
No, it's fine. I think it's more inclusive than the language that we had in the initial resolution we read tonight. So maybe we want to change the initial resolution to include these things. There are subgroups that I hadn't even thought about.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Because we didn't have age in there at all.
Right.
Yeah, we didn't, yeah.
Physical and mental disability.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think that language could.
I think it'd be good because it'd be consistent too.
I like the
Yeah.
consistency.
And then within that section, we also do have immigration status.
It's right. there,
Right,
too, yeah.
right,
Mhm.
And the word ancestor, which is great. too.
yeah, and it's inclusive to the language Mr. Flashman wanted to add
Mhm.
as
Physical
well.
and mental disability. Yeah.
Mhm.
Right. So I think that, I don't think Mr. Flashman needs to review it versus specifically. I think that we can just change all
Change
the
that,
paragraphs that have the subgroups to just reflect this one.
Absolutely, you got that.
Trustee Gonzalez Hoy,
Yes, please.
did if I think I just heard you say correctly, because this is what I was gonna suggest as well, is just taking the language out of this one and applying it to the other. Is that what you just said?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool, same page, thank you.
No, thank you. Okay, any last thoughts on this one specifically?
I really like that because just looking at marital status about our girls girls and our boys that attend the school for the pregnant people, like they're represented in here, and I forgot, I don't know the name of the school.
Adolescent
But
parenting program.
parenting program, yeah. So I think that that's really good. And I think that we are covering what Dr. Fleischman raised about religion and about our student and staff with disabilities. So I think that that's, I would suggest that this language also is reflected in when you create the 4,000 policy.
Yeah.
When you create the employment policy, that this language is just pulled from that and inserted. I'm complete.
Mr. Espinosa, go ahead.
So I would just suggest pulling the language for the executive director, the 504 coordinator, within the second link of the supporting documents. That document is the most up-to-date version of this policy that includes that 504,
Okay,
but adding the racialized harm.
yeah,
Mhm.
that makes sense.
That document.
We'll send it to him.
Okay.
Cool. Okay, that sounds great. All right, any last comments on this? Okay, I think that if we make all those changes, we should be
Yeah, let's bring it forward.
okay. All right, let's move to the next item. E4, which is our cell phone use policy. And I think that Ms. Acosta Verprascus is going to present the draft resolution, right? Oh.
Stepping in for Ms. Sigler, who could be with us.
Oh, wonderful, okay. Thank you, Ms. Smith.
You can share your screen.
Do you want me to share mine?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I told you, it's like this.
This is a hard mess. I mean,
Be careful with this.
yeah. Look at that. Terrible.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect. Great.
Yes.
All right, good evening. So we're bringing back a policy, or rather it's a resolution to create a policy regarding cell phone use in our school district. And so we've had several conversations about the use of cell phones in school districts, particularly the use of cell phones with children and developing adolescents. And this resolution first speaks to just everything that we've already talked about around how we know that cell phones are powerful tools for communication. It is great to integrate technology, but we also know that along with the benefits that there are several consequences and there's several areas of research that show that when cell phones are not monitored and there's unrestricted or unsupervised use, particularly in schools, that it can lead to significant distractions, decreased focus on our academic tasks, and it can negatively impact a student's academic achievement, as well as their overall attention in the classroom. We also know that when students have unlimited access to cell phones in the school environment, that they're more likely to engage in educational activities such as texting, browsing the web, being on social media, or gaming. In addition to that, there's several research articles by educational psychologists who have stated that students who are able to function without their cell phones often exhibit those higher levels of attention, of being able to focus in the classroom, leading to increased attention, which would lead to increased academic performance and engagement in classroom discussions. So essentially, we want to ensure, one, that we create environments that are safe for all students, and that we continue to educate students and families on the use of technology, but more importantly, how do we be responsible with technology, and really recognize that when technology goes unchecked, that it can really be detrimental in the students' academic progress. So the therefore clauses says that we will adopt a clear and consistent guidelines regarding cell phone use during school hours. These policies will include that cell phones will be required to remain off or in silent mode during class time and should not be used for non-educational purposes on school grounds unless they're explicitly authorized by a teacher or administrator for a specific instructional activity. And I think that goes to where we know that there's some students who just have to have the cell phone if we can't accommodate them in other ways. Some students have cell phones or the use of assistive technology written in IEPs, so that is that clause there. We also know, and so in the therefore it be resolved clauses, that we want to ensure that students have distraction-free environments so that they're not always using their cell phones. We want to continue to emphasize the importance of face-to-face social interactions, the importance of just talking to each other so that we can continue to foster positive peer relationships. The policy should address a balanced approach to technology integration. We want to work in collaboration with parents and families so that they understand the reasoning behind these cell phone guidelines, and we want to support just our overall effort again to have this distraction-free learning environment. And then we ended it with that the district will periodically review and assess the impact of cell phone policies on student achievement, safety, and overall school climate, and incorporating some type of feedback mechanism from students, parents, and staff to ensure that our policy remains relevant. And so we will adopt a policy that's comprehensive, that has clear guidelines, and we will communicate that policy to all stakeholders in WCCUSD, as well as conduct regular reviews.
Thank you so much. Do we have any public comment on this one?
No public comment at this time.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're gonna do it a little differently, because I really want to be able to share my comments before everyone else. So I'm gonna use my chair privilege to do that. So I'm gonna go, the president, and then I'll go, and then I'll open it up for everyone else.
So I have two questions. What happens if because in here, it just says remain silent and off or silent, right? So what happens if the teacher's rule is you have to put it in the cabinet, or you have to put it in the little locker? So if I'm a student and I'm reading this and I was that type of student, I'd be like, no, you just told me I have to have it silent and off. But the teacher says, no, every student has to get your point for the day or whatever, you have to put your cell phone in the locker. Have we addressed that, or have we thought about that? Or is there needs to be a language change to add that as if your teacher says that it goes, I mean, because at Greenwood, they go in the pouch. No, they have pouches. They go in the pouch. It's not silent. It's not off. It's not in your backpack. It's in the pouch. At Hercules, in some of the classes, it's in the safe. Got to put it in the safe no matter what. So is there language around that, or how do we address that? That's my first question. I have one more after that.
I think you should just ask your question.
Oh, my second question. Have anywhere in this, do we talk about watches? I can do anything from my cell phone on my watch. Like my watch, I can sit here and text on my watch. I can answer a call on my watch. I can do apps and games on my watch. Have we addressed that? And if we have not, is that something that we think should be inside the policy? To your point, it's fluid, because probably next year Apple's gonna come out with something where you can do it with earbuds. Or
Your glasses.
your glasses,
So,
like,
yeah, I would just change it to wearables.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a watch,
Wearables.
just call it a wearable.
Okay,
Mhm.
Aren't wearable
Yeah.
devices.
Mhm.
that, I'm complete. Those are my two questions.
I guess my question would be, how is this different than what we already have?
That's
Because sorry, it's kind of like sounds like a gotcha question, because I see it as over what we're already doing, right? Like, we know cell phones are not allowed in the classroom unless allowed by a teacher or unless it's a part of it, right? But we're trying to avoid that. So I think that allowing that to continue, I think it's gonna continue to allow inconsistency. So I feel that, and please, you're welcome to push back, anyone's welcome to push back, but I think that we need to be explicit that cell phones should only be allowed to be used at school if the IEP calls for it. I don't think that teachers should be allowed to give that permission. I don't think that administrators should be able to allow them to just situational. I think only through IEP should that be allowed. Now, I acknowledge that's a ban, right? So we don't want to do that automatically. So my caveat to this resolution, because it's not a policy, right? I think our questions and our comments will be addressed in the policy, but I think that this shares our intent to the community. So I think that, like, what I would like to add is one last paragraph at the end that says, the policy will include a ban on cell phone use during school hours in school grounds unless allowed by IEP. Well, Mr. Flashman, you're gonna have to help me with that language, probably Ms. Smith too, because I don't know if that's just how appropriately stated. Starting the school year of the 25, 26 school,
Yeah.
for all K-12 schools
Yeah.
in West Contra Costa. Because I think that, like, sorry, why don't we open it up?
Yeah,
I'm
so.
going hard, fast, friend.
Sorry.
I'm the messenger.
Yeah.
Woo!
Glad
All
you
right,
don't be trusted.
so from my understanding, clerk and president,
Mm-mm.
this is a resolution to create the policy. This is not the policy. We will actually develop a policy, and originally the intent was to start that process in January for our elementary schools, right? Was it elementary in January?
I think we've had said elementary and middle, but
Yeah, and so, yeah, and we,
one potential high school could pilot, and had an interest from one school site that we might want to start as early as January.
okay.
so, and we were gonna put together a working group with those kind of like pilot schools to like learn best practice or what have you, and then come back with a final policy to be fully implemented at the beginning of the 25-26 school year. I do though hear you on the language to be very clear with the policy will include a ban. I want to wordsmith that a little bit, but a ban on cell phone usage during
Wearables.
cell phone usage and wearables, and we can, wordsmith it, but unless designated by a student's IEP or 504 accommodation plan. I do want to reference that we have a draft board policy that LA Unified started, and that was the policy that we referenced to get to this resolution. I know that Michael Booker shared last time that he had been in contact with some folks from LA Unified as they drafted that policy. And we do know that the state of California, Governor Newsom, is requiring schools to create policies around cell phone usage. So this is an intent to educate the public, our students, and all stakeholders around why we are going to go in this direction. And then we will do that hard policy.
Got it. We'll go Dr. Hurst,
I would just say.
and then we'll go with Dr. Most, and then I'll go after that.
Thank you, LaShante. I understand that this is just a resolution. However, I too feel uncomfortable with the resolution coming forward that is similar to language that we currently have in our board policy that states cell phones or wearables will be required to remain off or on silent mode. I mean, that piece right there it's much of the same. It's what's in our policy. So I think that needs to be eliminated if we're gonna bring this resolution forward. So that would be my recommendation.
Is that on the,
That's on number 1, under cell phone usage guidelines.
got it.
Mhm.
So perhaps it should say the district will adopt clear and consistent guidelines regarding cell phone use during school hours.
Yes,
Cell phones and wearables
yes,
are not permitted during
Yes.
class time and should not be like that.
yes,
Okay,
yes.
Dr. Moses, thank you.
Yeah, along those guidelines, I think when I look at like the whereas, they make sense, right? That is the teachable part. But the therefore be resolved, I think it does too much explaining and it might confuse things.
Mhm.
So I was reading through it as if we only kept the first line, right? We take out all the explanation because that's where we get a little gray.
got it.
Because the first line does establish, like 5, parental involvement, says that we're working, oh, that's only one line.
Oh, like the first line of each sentence, paragraph? Got it.
Mhm.
Because the rest of it is what we already have in
Mhm.
place, so it doesn't prepare them for the
Right.
different system.
Got it.
Mhm.
Thank you for that. Yeah, my suggestion is maybe similar, that we actually add language that specifically calls out during the 24-25 school year, while a long-term policy on cell phone use is created. These are the guidelines. And then at the end, we add another paragraph specifically saying the policy will include X and Y, which is practically calling out the ban, right? But I think that allows for staff to understand, okay, for this year, we're continuing with these guidelines, unless you're a
Got it.
pilot school,
Uh-huh.
right? And we're gonna wait for something to come out. Cause I also
Yeah.
don't want it to be confusing to people who are like, oh, okay, well, then I'm gonna be allowed to continue to use my cell phone, whatever, right? It's just while we're creating this policy.
Yeah, and I'm actually suggesting things too. I think and therefore it be resolved. I do see how this is now going back into the education piece and not firm in the policy. So I'm actually gonna suggest that we take out the part around social emotional well-being because we already covered that. The balanced approach to technology integration, we covered that already. The parental involvement, I think the first sentence, that sentence itself can stay. And the last one, so anyways, I'm saying that we should take out 2, 3, and 4 because we already covered that actually in the whereas clauses.
Sounds good. Any other comments, Dr. Moses?
When we've been doing site visits, and I noticed in our visit to Hercules High School, while the classes all have the container to store the phones in for security, right? And you can lock it. It's like a little suitcase that you could pick up and take with you. So we do also need to make sure when we roll this out, the dance teacher has hers affixed on the wall.
Yeah.
So that's not going anywhere, but some kind of expectation that the device that is protecting the phones be bolted or is not removable, because I could see an issue if phones go missing.
Well, and at Richmond High, they just have like a little Tupperware container in the
And they
center
do
and
it all
people
in.
just put it in. And so it was like, oh, well, yeah, that works too.
Right.
Don't have
Right.
to spend $1,000 on yonder pouch.
Lock it in the closet.
But that also, sorry, go ahead.
So, shot in the dark type of thing, but I just want to put it out there. I'm a student, my phone is in the little container pocket. We have an earthquake, whole building shuts down, you just broke my phone. You pay for that? Do we pay for that? Do we get sued for that? Do we get a replacement? Like, I'm just shot in the dark, how does that work, right? Or there's a fire, or someone breaks into Highland or Bayview, and then they take the box, or they do whatever, or what is that, and this may come later, but when we talk about issues with the cell phone being in one spot instead in your book bag, right? And we start rolling this educational piece out, I think we need to let parents know, if your cell phone is damaged or whatever, we're not paying for it. You chose to let that kid have that cell phone at school, right? Just like if their laptops are covered under thing, but if kids bring other things to school, we are not responsible for what they bring to school if it's stolen, lost, or damaged, right? It's like you chose to put your grandmother's ring in your bag, so you choose to have that liability. Ms. Roberts, Lawyer Roberts.
We do
Juan
have
Roberts.
something about personal devices in the student acceptable use policy already.
Okay, so it's, is that, would this be under that? Would this cover that?
Just looking it over again.
Or do we?
Personal
explicitly call
device
it?
liability. WCCUSD and its member schools are not responsible for damage, theft, or loss of personal electronic communication equipment. WCCUSD will not repair or troubleshoot personal devices. Students should not leave personal laptops or devices unattended. Students are fully responsible for the cost of replacement should their electronic device become lost, stolen, or damaged.
I think that those type of questions that can be brought up and answered during the creation of the policy.
Okay,
Because I think that we won't see that in the resolution, right? I think that we'll see, and that's why I think that we wanna give time, 6 months for staff to come, to bring that, because I think that there has to be a lot of conversations, like with different groups too, right? Like about procedurally, what to do. Because even the schools that have already done something, they're all doing something different.
different, right,
And I think that is also a problem,
Yeah.
right? And I think that in the creation of that policy, whether it's gonna be here or it's gonna be outside of here, I think it should be inclusive of teachers and some administrators and et cetera.
and students.
And students,
Maybe,
potentially, yeah.
I just think that that would be better. To your
Yeah.
point, I'm so scared about like a place like Richmond High School where somebody just runs in and knocks over the whole thing. And then you've got 5 iPhones that are broken that are $1,000 a piece or something. But to your point, we seem like we already have it covered. We just may have to add consistent language.
There's
around
also,
both of them.
Actually, we don't.
Oh, we don't have it covered. Wah, wah.
Because that is if a student willingly, if a student is responsible for the device. If our policy says you gotta give your
turn it
phone
in.
to your teacher, then the responsibility transfers to the
Back to the
teacher or to the school or to the
Okay.
district, right?
Okay.
I just also wanted to comment that when we think about this policy, we think back to when cell phones initially started to become a thing. There were clear policies for schools. If I see it, I take it, right? And I can remember my oldest child being in middle school and I say, if the teacher takes that phone, you won't be bringing it back to school, right? So I don't know if we could start with a tiered approach where we try and just trust our students to put it away. I know this is gonna be a heavy lift in high school, so I don't know what the results would be, but just wanted to offer that maybe we should think about a tiered approach, because taking and locking up student cell phones, although it may be necessary, it is gonna feel intrusive and we probably don't wanna, hammer it.
And I think that even more important than in the classroom too, I mean, that's obviously key, but it's also what happens in the in-betweens, right? And we can't really ask students to leave it in the classroom, right? Will they go to lunch or whatever? So I think that those are gonna be kind of the questions that are gonna have to be brought up to the group of people who create the actual policy, and how it's implemented.
at Betty Reed Soskin, they actually let the students keep them in their bags, but it's that if I see it, I'll take it. But they do have a tiered approach where it's like first time, second time, third time. I think it's the third time they actually hold on to it and a responsible adult has to come and retrieve it.
Yeah, and I agree that I think like we have to teach students responsibility too, right? And try to build in them the capacity to have that self-control and to keep phones away. The question then becomes, when we do if I see it, I take it, what do I do when the student says?
Nope.
No,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And like giving clear guidelines to teachers, because we've seen cases where, you know, it's snatched out of the hand and then it just escalates, right? So point well taken to the tiered approach. And then my question too was, are we originally, the goal was to have this policy developed beginning in January after we do this resolution, and then to bring it back for full implementation 25-26 school year? Are we still on that track?
I want to be realistic and allow you all to have enough time to think through all these questions. So originally I was really pushing for that, but I think that I'm okay with doing K-12 implementation next year. Because I think that there has to be a lot of conversations with different groups. I don't want to put something forward that actually backfires and takes us longer to do it right because we started it wrong. So even as simple as, I think elementary is going to be a much easier lift, but even there, right, we don't want to do it incorrectly. Which is, you know, the problem with 55 schools too, right? If we had one school, two schools, it'd be much easier. But so I would say let's bring back this resolution with the changes that we have asked for at our December meeting.
Okay.
With the idea of hopefully passing it in December or January, the latest. And then I actually don't think that the final policy for review should come back to governance, but I trust you all to create a committee or create subgroup that will write and create the policy and the AR to do that. Are you okay with that?
I am. I mean, as a parent of 2 students now in the district versus 3, because the one graduated out, there are like things that I would want to talk and make sure that we kind of cover. The other thing, for example, is my middle child puts her phone away. She has an IEP. She puts her phone away, but then she's texting me off this doggone computer. I was like, how, what are you doing? Like, or she's emailing me off the computer, or she's emailing me. No, she's emailing me off of this computer. And I'm like, that's still, you're being distracted. What are you doing? You might as well shoot me a text if you're gonna shoot me like 55 emails. So it's just the intentionality behind, if we want to keep students focused in and drilled in, and she doesn't want to use the phone because she doesn't want to not be like everybody else. So then she's trying to find what's the pathway to still have questions answered, or that safety net or whatever that's provided in that security of being able to just like, hey, text me real quick. Hey, what does this mean? Or, you know, the guidance. So I believe that the extension of the timeline is necessary. I believe that we have to be flexible, because I think when we solve a problem, we're gonna create a problem. When we put this in, it's gonna be like, oh, we fixed that, but then this happened. So how are we gonna be malleable enough? It's my new favorite word. Enough to make sure that we are quick. And I would like us to make sure we include our teachers, because I don't want to pass something that they have to implement and they're like, you have no idea what you just created for me. And same thing with the principals, and same thing with the students. I'm complete.
I do think that if we could have a deadline of bringing that policy for review for April meeting, it would be great for us to be able to share something out before the end of the school year. I don't want administrators and teachers to see it in August.
Right.
Hopefully, I mean, I don't want to stress them over the summer thinking about how to implement a cell phone, but I think it would probably be better, because a lot of the teams meet sometimes over the summer. So,
Start is how it goes.
yes, exactly.
To President Snisfold's point about the laptops, if our intent too is to reduce distractions, I can do everything on this laptop. I can
So you're playing the games
iMessage, I
on this little
can
thing?
access social media, everything.
Mhm.
So I think I think we have to add some language around, because the laptop can then again function as a cell phone and it's not a wearable.
Yes.
Right, and well, and our Chromebooks, we're constantly working on basically shutting things down.
Mhm. On the network.
And making them safer.
Okay.
Great. Well,
Thank
I
you.
think it can also be a collaboration. One of the things that I'm gonna be discussing with the president and Dr. Hirsch soon, and Dr. Moses, is bringing back a tech committee. So maybe that can also be a place to have a discussion around that, in the spring. So
I like that.
One thing to think about on timelines,
Yeah.
being a parent myself, is not only the teachers being prepared for the new policy, but for parents who may or may not be buying new technology before they went back to school. It would be very disappointing if they buy, especially like a wearable or something, more so than the cell phone specifically for school life, and then realizing that that's not going to be acceptable at school. So when we're communicating out, especially at the back to school time.
That's a really good point.
Yep.
And some wearables are different because my husband, he can't do anything with his watch. It just counts his steps. Mine, I can do everything with mine. So, because he said, I lose myself. So he's like, you got your watch. But that's to your point, what wearables are acceptable and not acceptable under this policy that we're talking about. Yeah, I think your tech committee would be great. Don't put me on it, but that's great. Just
Okay,
because I
well,
would slow everybody down, friend. I'm a Flintstone in the Jetsons world, so I would just slow your work down.
okay, so sounds like we're all on the same page. Resolution come back in December, policy will be worked on, January through April.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Okay, well, let's move to item.
In the classroom.
3.5.
Yeah, policy on heat in the classroom, Title B, CCO.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so for this one, I don't know if we necessarily need a policy, but I was talking to her that there is new, I don't know if it's legislation or rules around if heat exceeds a certain temperature in classrooms. That was passed, I think, a few months ago.
So it was introduced through OSHA.
Okay.
So it's not exactly a law. And it actually only applies to employees versus students, which is kind of an interesting thing because it is implemented through OSHA. But it happened, I believe, July 30th, either June or July 30th.
Got it. Well, how about I just pass it on to you, and if you could educate us. Really the idea is that we discuss what are the changes and then whether or not we need to update our policy around it.
Right. So there's significant changes. So previously OSHA only regulated outdoor spaces. So we're used to it in the construction world, the requirements that we have around heat-related illness for construction workers, because that's mostly an outside location. And it was also very specific to only certain industries. So construction was included in that, but it did not cover every employee across the state. However, when they implemented the indoor air policy or the indoor temperature regulations, although most of the literature refers to things that you would find in a more industrial manufacturing type environment, they did not relate it to certain industries the same way they did the exterior requirements. And so this has come forward. It does talk about a temperature of 87 degrees. It does not necessarily require us to be below 87 degrees. However, certain mitigation measures need to be in place if the temperature goes above that 87 degree mark.
Could you
Now,
talk about this as well, if you don't mind?
right, so they're not super clear, and it is shown in the information that was part of the agenda packet. There's a section here that, and like I said, this was originally written more for industry than it is for a classroom environment, so some of them really don't even make sense. But, reduce the heat or create a barrier between the employee and the heat source. Obviously, that's not appropriate for for just a hot day in a room that doesn't have air conditioning. Increase ventilation, but again, it says only if the heat index is not the same. Cooling fans or air conditioning, ventilation, heat shields. Again, that's something that's not, and if you're trying to follow along on page 3 of the document attached in the bullet points. And so, but access to water is a component of it. So there are, and I pulled up a different resource that had a better listing. But part of it also talks about cool down spaces. And one of the things that we did try, or that was previously an effort within the facilities department before my time, when the schools were being modernized, is normally there is a location on site that does have air conditioning, whether it was the computer lab or the office or the library. A lot of our schools have that, not 100% ubiquitous, but that could possibly be the cool down space. And then, of course, the access to water is something we already have present on site. The piece about fans or air conditioning, while fans, we've definitely been providing fans on our hotter days. They're, the air conditioning component is complicated. And so those are the pieces that are in place with this new regulation.
Thank you. Do we have any public comment on this item?
No public comment at this time.
Okay, thank you. So, okay, let me just summarize. So it really is just, the changes are that saying that if a space is over 87 degrees, we need to provide our employees one of these mitigating what are they called?
Mitigation measures.
Thank you, measures. In order to cool down the space for the employee.
Or to provide relief from the heat, right? And so when you look back at the intent of the regulation, it's really talking about preventing heat-related illness. So if you're trying to prevent heat-related illness, if you're exposed to heat for a certain amount of time, you know, having access to cool water, having access to another location that potentially has air conditioning, those are part of the components of the law as well as about trying to prevent heat illness. But also have something, one of the pieces would be having a fan or air conditioning within the actual space.
Got it. And then do we have a policy right now that specifically states temperature and mitigating strategies that we have to implement if temperatures go past certain number?
I do not know the answer to this.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Okay, well, why don't we move to questions from people, and then we'll move to comments. Someone explain maybe a little bit more of what I was thinking that I would like for us to do. Questions?
My questions are around age and pregnancy. When you are pregnant, you get hot real quick. You get cold real quick, you get hot real quick, like it's extreme, right? I am now of the age that I may or may not be in menopause. I go in some of these classrooms at Hercules, I almost fainted. I was like, yo, it's hot because they're in a portable or it's a different facility or what have you. Does this, or should we, or does this require any kind of delineation between certain type of conditions? I'm complete. Just so you know, I would file a lawsuit if I was at Hercules and had to teach in that classroom, because it's hot. I shouldn't say that out loud, but I'm just telling you, it's really hot, friend. Like, when we
Dr.
was in there, I
Johnson,
was
jump
like,
in.
Just because I was, you know, just because I was, you know, I know, just because I was hot. So, you know, but I'm complete. Sorry about that. Don't record that part.
Well,
Okay.
I think that this new change allows for employees to potentially file an OSHA complaint if we're not providing with mitigations to bring down the heat, right? But I guess what I'm trying to get to, like, when I want to go further, is that we know there's been a problem in the last decade, especially with climate change and the microclimates that we have in this district. And unfortunately, with second-story buildings, especially in the Richmond area, that we built prior to us changing our policy where we always include air conditioning now with our rebuilds. Back in the day, we used to not do that. So we have new schools, well, new, quote unquote, new, that don't have AC, and they get really hot. Dover, Lincoln, right, like there's like, and we hear every year, the classroom was over 90 degrees between August and October, and again in April and May, which I think is a huge problem. We thought Measure R was going to allow us to add AC in all of our schools, which is about, at the time, it's like about $100 million that where we would have to pay. Obviously, we can't do that, right? So how can we help in those situations? I would like for us to write a policy that specifically states what we will do as a district to support schools when temperature goes above a certain percentage and there's no AC. And that can look similar to this, or it can look differently depending on past 80 degrees, past 90 degrees, right? Because I also think that there's a problem with our current mitigation. Like, for example, last year, Dover had 4 classrooms at the library from a second floor all day, which like not just was a safety issue because there was really no space for 4 classrooms, but it was the only space with air conditioning in the building outside of the office. So our mitigation doesn't work in that case. So I think that we need to figure out a way to support administrators and teachers on situations like that when AC is cost prohibitive. Anyways, that's kind of like my reasoning for bringing this forward.
Do we take into account where we place summer school? Do we take into account when we're placing summer school that the facility has to be able to mitigate the temperature? And that's just a question. And if we don't, should that be part of when we're doing use of facilities or when we're doing placement of activities like summer school, or not activities, but education like summer school, that we're looking at those sites that are up to this code that we are wanting to implement? It's just
I mean, I think it's something that should probably be taken into consideration, but we will have to be careful with that because it very well could limit entire swaths of the district that are probably in the areas of town that we would most likely need the program. So while, you know, it's a valid consideration, I don't think you would want to write that into a policy because that could.
Because then you could open summer school at a particular site where the kids were able to walk there or get dropped off there. So it creates another, fixing a problem creates a problem.
Yeah.
What about any language around building, rebuilding?
Well,
Or
we
is
already
this
have,
already up to this code?
correct me if I'm wrong, but now, for any new building we build, we add air conditioning, correct?
We do. I mean, it's not a formal policy. It's
Okay.
just one of the standards that we use within our department. But that is in place.
Okay.
It's also cheaper to do while the rebuild happens than later on.
Then we have to add it.
I got educated on this last year.
Especially on the electrical front. So the hidden issue behind HVAC is that it also triggers a lot of our electrical systems to need to be upgraded. Because heat, a lot of times is gas powered. So the electrical load to condition our spaces is very minimal across these schools that do not have air conditioning because we use natural gas to do the heating. So therefore, there is no electrical capacity to accommodate the cooling function. And that's very difficult because the only way you accomplish cooling is through electrical load. And so the bigger problem and part of the reason for that price tag that we were talking about back in 2022, I looked up the presentation because I was like, what exactly did we say there? Is that it says that 35 of our schools do not have air conditioning. So it's a huge lift. It's a huge lift. And it's also a huge dollar amount depending on how we approach it because of the the fact that you can't just add air conditioning to site. Beyond adding air conditioning, you also need to basically redo the main electrical into the site. And for reference, right now, to do that kind of work with PG&E, it's a 1 to 2 years process, just to be able to get the application and get the equipment. We're still having a lot of trouble getting MSBs. So there's a long process to be able to do the electrical load component. But trying to look at other mitigations and smaller scale mitigations, we have been concentrating on doing that in several of the schools to pilot how it will go, especially on the second floor where we have access to windows that don't necessarily invite a security risk by having the windows dedicated to a portable unit.
Okay. Mr. Ortiz?
So, since we have a new policy that all new buildings are gonna have air conditioning, in the case of Pinole Valley High School, where their HVAC hasn't worked. That's our newest rebuilt school, right? Or is it Pinole High School? What happens in that case?
Yeah, I mean.
Well, I think there also needs to be an understanding of what working looks like. I know that there's an expectation of what HVAC systems are capable of. And they are not capable of lowering the temperature beyond more than a 20 degree scale, right? 20 to 30 degrees is about all you get out of a normal functioning air conditioning system, unless you are in a very high, unless you're in a very specific space that paid for that type of over air conditioning quality. And so one of the things that we struggle with, especially in our heat waves, is the ability for the system to actually cool to the expectations of the users. And that isn't necessarily the same thing of what the temperature is capable of. Now, I understand that there are specific areas that we have been working on Knoll to commission that system and get it operational. And so we are and have addressed some issues that were severe, but some of the commentary that's coming out of that school especially is really about expectations of how close the temperature can be to individuals' desired temperature. And especially during our more severe heat waves, it is difficult to have a system be able to really bring a temperature down below that 20 to 30 degree change from the exterior air with the amount of outside air that is expected to come into the facility.
And schools with AC, it's centrally controlled, correct?
It is centrally controlled. However, it's within a band. So there normally is some adjustability from the thermostat within the room. But centrally controlled air is not unusual. It's very common for most school districts, if not all. It's actually part of an energy management system that is required by code to be installed. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be controlled centrally, but we do need to put an energy management system into our buildings to be able to meet the green code.
I think one of the things that I'm interested in is how does this play into our dress code policy? And the reason I say that is if it's 87 degrees in the classroom and I can't wear a tank top or do something to cool myself down because dress code policy says that you can't have straps or thin spaghetti straps, right? How are we, as part of our mitigation strategies, dealing with the realities of the teacher and the student in the classroom? And if we are unable to do X, how do we ensure that it has a positive impact on Y, right? So That's anywhere from wearing shorter shorts or tank tops or things that are, now listen, I know some of these high school kids, they wear hoodies in 100-degree weather, but they also, that leads to the fact that they can also have symptoms of heat stroke and not even know it, right? How does this go along to our instructional minutes when we have to cancel PE? Or no outdoor PE? Well, then now we have 200 kids in the gym, right? Which brings the temperature up and all that. It's just, this adds questions for me that may not have answers to them now, but again, it's from the parent lens, I'm like, you're not wearing that sweatshirt today. Well, mom, I have to because I have this underneath it, but it's dress code. If I don't wear this, then get a t-shirt, don't wear all black. Like, you're gonna have to like mitigate some of these strategies because it's gonna be hot in your classroom and you can't do it. So just again, when we're talking about this, I would like to make sure that we're understanding the implications at on the ground levels. And what does that look like? And how do we create policy that supports what we can handle financially or physically or facility wise? I'm complete.
Well, and just to round back on the gym, up until Richmond and Kennedy that we're working on now, gyms were not air conditioned. They had exhaust fans, they were not air conditioned. And the same for kitchens, in case we're keeping track of different work environments. And both of those are just because of the structure of the environment and the difficulty to be able to provide conditioned space for them. We are looking at both Richmond and Kennedy rebuilt to air condition both the kitchen as well as the gyms. But just for clarity, if people are listening into fully air conditioned, it's not technically true.
Got it. Thank you. Mr. Mitchell, and then I'll give a.
So, yeah, so on the point of the kitchens, the Teamsters representatives couldn't be here tonight because they have a membership meeting. But they said this particular, situation is of extreme concern for food service workers in the district. That there's certain kitchen work environments where the heat is just out of control and people are suffering, physical repercussions from that. So I do know that when teachers call with extreme temperatures in their rooms, they call UTR frequently, when we have these heat waves. I just tell them to take the students and leave the classroom, right? And to use their best judgment, that there's no immediate help coming, because everybody's asking the principal, what do I do? And they don't know what to do. And so we're in a situation where students are suffering educational loss because of the disruptions that are every year for a certain number of days every year, some years more than others, but it's affecting, certain schools and communities much more than others. And, students have nosebleeds, they can't learn. We have had a number of teachers, taking pictures for the Williams complaints of the temperatures at 87, 91, really extreme situations. Certain of the classrooms on second stories, even I know Francisco's classroom when he worked at Ford, right, was extremely hot. And it's what I'm hearing is like, we can't do anything about it. And I think that we have to think about what we can do about it, whether it's attic fans, swamp coolers, mini splits, and certain rooms are really problematic. And we shouldn't just say, oh, it's too expensive, we can't do anything about it overall. We have certain places that are real pricey.
Second or third story buildings, sometimes it's 10 degrees hotter than it is outside before the students come in. And so when you have it after lunchtime or after recess, and kids have been playing and fifth graders won't take off their shoes for no reason whatsoever. And when it comes in April and May, it becomes especially problematic. Then you're dealing with scent or smell.
Absolutely.
But like, I don't know if it was 2017 or whatever, when we first swamp coolers were first tried out. I got an email from a teacher over at Downer saying we had 2 portable AC units placed in our room, and I asked my administrator, and he doesn't know where they came from. They were installed. So there's also an equity issue where either some folks are getting an air conditioner, portable or not, or in places like Ellerhorst where they have a remodernization, not rebuild, they have AC, right? And so we've been talking about this for close to almost a decade. and it's really becoming almost like we're saying the same thing, just to a new board, to a new administration, to our students.
I think that's a good segue to a summary. I think that we're not at a place where I think that we have board and staff that wants to do something. So I think that the next step is creating policy. Sorry, I was putting my back on you. Policy in response to heat in the classrooms, right? Knowing that AC is not an option, like I want us to create a policy that specifically calls out the procedure and the process for schools that suffer of heat in the classroom within the conditions that we can provide, right? I would like for staff to take the helm on that. And I think that it should include UTR in that perspective. So I think it could even maybe started by the facilities department in collaboration with, I don't know if it's Mr. Ziegler's or Mr. Costa or Prescott's department, but Ziegler, and then bring that first initial thought to UTR and Teamsters to kind of look through as well. Because I think that it also has to be inclusive of other spaces outside of classrooms, right? So I think that it's gonna be a bigger policy. But I think that if we had a facilities committee, maybe that would be.
You were never.
Food for thought. But I don't have a timeline for that because I don't know how long that would take. I'll let you guys maybe, why don't you talk about it in cabinet and the facilities department? And then I would like to have it in place for the 25-26 school year for sure. To make sure that we can do it right. Because there's a lot of questions also about reporting, right? And how, like what's going to access what, depending on, like sometimes we only have like a 1-day hot day. Also mean that we're gonna provide auxiliary AC units for a 1 hot day, right? So how are we also gonna measure that? So anyways, there's I think a lot of questions that can be looked through on that, but I would like to have a policy for us to look at by the end of the year.
Also want us to keep in mind, that anything that we put in place, teachers have to deal with. I don't know what a swamp fan is, but if it's anything that you stick your finger in, or that you can stick a piece of paper in, or that you can go like those old fans where you go and you stick your voice in and it echoes out differently. We have to realize that that's then something that, again, teachers have to be able to put as part of their classroom norms. Don't touch that fan. Don't do that. If you do that, then this is gonna happen. Like, so I think giving enough time, but having it to where, okay, we're gonna implement this here. I know that at Hercules Middle School, they have fans in the gym at the PTA vault. They don't turn them on because they can't watch 50 kids and somebody's gonna mess with that fan. So they just pop the doors open, right? But then it's their idea of like when kids go past the gym and they're yelling because the doors are open, you know, so there's, again, one thing creates something else, but I think that we have to do something about the heat in California and in our schools, and especially our schools that are have so many different sides of the bell curve. So I'm complete. I agree with you.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I recognize the need, and as we go into what feels like global warming, it seems to be, increasing. I can remember my teachers at Siege, we might have a couple hot days a year, and they would have spray bottles and spray the kids, and I'm like, stop spraying kids, right? Don't do that. But that was, that's why we use policy, right? But I also think that I know facilities does a lot of work with critical needs projects, and I think we also have to start thinking about if this is gonna get progressively worse, can we have some kind of plan where we're looking at, okay, this is the school with the highest need, when we get funding, we start here, so that at least people know we're paying attention and addressing it over time as funding becomes available. So I think the policy is great, but I think also a plan for what we aspire to do, which is address this for every school.
That makes total sense. Thank you for that. Okay, and then, I did want to mention, if in that policy, whoever's creating it, we can include also subgroups. I think the president mentioned like age and pregnancy, right? Like what would be the triggers to request? I'm guessing it would be through the accommodation process, but I think that maybe we also have to call it out to make sure that people understand and know that they can access that resource. So, just wanted to put that out there.
Can I just say, and this may be different, but also pick up and drop off. Some kids are waiting outside for 30 minutes at the end of school, and it's dripping wet hot, right? And there's no shade at the school, but this is where the drop-off spot is. So asking questions around pick up and drop off about just what facilities can and cannot do financially responsibly, but as someone who does traffic daily and having kids that have to have the umbrella, okay, just sit under the umbrella, and teachers come out with these huge umbrellas to shield kids because the heat is just beating down on them. So I just want to lift that up, that's part of this too. I'm complete.
Wonderful.
You got an answer.
Thank you. Okay, well then let's move to our next item, unless there are any last.
7:30.
Okay, and there's a chance this might be our last item, depending on time, but we're now gonna move to number 6, which is student board members. I'm gonna do my best, Dr. Moses, to introduce this. What we learned is that legally, we're actually not allowed to pay our student board members $500 a month. So there's various reasons for that. I'm not gonna get into the why, but we're just told no. So we need to actually change this policy, either to reflect what we can do, which I think is very little, or how to accommodate getting to $500 by asking our student board members to potentially do more, to be it so that we can actually what's it called? Show why they're getting $500. Does that make sense? My suggestion, and Dr. Moses, tell me if you were thinking differently, is that we put in the board policy, I'm sorry, Dr. Hirsch, could you, oh, you're already doing it.
Yes.
Look at you. If you could go down to where it says pay, okay, there you go. My suggestion is that we change financial compensation of $300, which I think is within the allowable amount, just simply for being in the position. And that then we add a sentence where we pay them $100 per agenda review meeting that they attend. So that would lead to $500, but then that is requiring them to attend an additional meeting, which is of a couple hours sometimes. Do you think that that would allow for us to be able to pay them $500 by adding those responsibilities?
Sure, but the agenda review will require them to miss class, so we have a new issue. Are you open to a different suggestion?
Yeah, if you were coming with an illustration, yeah, absolutely.
So if you give them a stipend for reviewing materials before meetings and maybe for presenting at board meetings. So maybe, so maybe you say there's another, if you want to get to 500, you can say 100 for reviewing the materials ahead of time. And then just name it as a stipend. We're not paying you to be a board member, but we're paying you a stipend to attend meetings and a stipend to study the materials before meetings. And then if you wanted to throw in, I don't know what your pricing structure would be, but you could also throw in a stipend for student trustee presentations to the board. So if you structured this so that the students are receiving a stipend for work, right? Then it's the equivalent of the stipend we would give our staff as opposed to payment to a student trustee.
I really like your suggestion about review materials. I think that the presentation might be a little bit different because they only present maybe once or twice during their term. So unless we make that very large to be able to equate the total amount that we were given this semester, I think it'd be difficult, but do they attend a monthly student congress meeting?
Yes, I think they can do that, and they can do agenda review, because agenda review is actually after school hours, so it's always in the evening with me.
Oh, so not the agenda review with the whole team, just an agenda?
I mean, if we did it, we would probably have to do it after school hours as well. Because every agenda review, even for some of our board members, when they come to the one-on-ones, it's late in the evening, so that can be easily done, like right now.
That's what they do with you now, though.
That's what
They
they do right
attend
now.
agenda review in the after,
It's after
afternoon,
school
evening.
hours.
Oh, you already do that?
Yeah.
Oh, then yes, I didn't know you did that.
Mhm.
Dr. Russ was like, I don't wanna have evening
Yeah.
meetings.
I do that already.
The official agenda
Oh,
review.
gotcha.
Right.
Yeah, so I do everything that we do with the board president and the clerk, but I do it with them as well.
Well, I think that takes care of it.
Yeah, maybe,
Yeah.
$300 stipend for the meetings, 100 for agenda review and 100 for meeting prep. I
Mhm.
just think we should. set
Can I
that.
just be every party has a pooper? Can I just be the pooper in this? My question is, who checks if they review the materials? We got board members that don't review the materials. And they coming up there like, oh, let me pull like 55, you know, so what? Right, so like, is there something more accountable
Mhm.
that we can have in place? Like attending the agenda review, I can see you're there, you got your
Right.
100.
Right.
Coming to the board meetings, I see you're there, you've got your 300 stipend or whatever, or you're a trustee, you got voted in.
Mhm.
What's something else that if we were thinking about it, that we can hold them to a level of accountability, because we're trying to teach work ethic, we're trying to teach, this is what responsibility is, we're trying to teach this is what governance is. If it's presenting once a month in the superintendent's report, something, even something small, it's something that we can actually hold.
Well, what
the
about,
candidate
what
to.
about just attending their one-on-ones and attending their student congress meeting?
That's what I was gonna say.
That would work, because
Student
then it's
congress
just
meetings, yeah.
about, whoever's there to take role during their, that's part of your,
Yeah.
that's part of your thing. Do they do time cards? How do we know? What do they do? Who's responsible for that?
We just stipend them.
Just stipend them?
Yeah.
Off of good
and
faith?
So
Got
we'll
it.
need somebody to actually.
Make sure that they're checking
Notify.
in. Yeah.
Question?
Is 300 too
Student
much?
Congress. No. I'm okay with the amount, we just have to make it,
Right.
adjusted, how we compensate them. But, student congress, do they lead student congress, or are they just participating in student
I think
congress?
they leave it, right? I don't know.
Because if they're only
Yeah.
participating, then we'll open up the can of worms of the other students in student
Why
congress
aren't
wanting
you
a stipend.
thinking that?
I think we probably need to check with Casey. Is she the one that runs it? Blackburn,
I'm not sure.
all student congress. It used to be Tashaka, but it's not that.
It's Casey.
I think it's Casey. We can check with Casey.
And I think that that's something that needs to be added to their,
Yeah.
job
And
description.
honestly, I don't think that they facilitate. I think they participate.
Is it even happening?
It's happening in 2 weeks.
Oh.
It hasn't started yet?
No, has not.
Okay, well, I'm worried about the current student trustees won't be able to get paid then.
Right.
Okay, let's
When do
remove
they
student
start?
congress an option for now.
We can say 200 for agenda review. I mean, as long as I'm okay with getting to the 500 amount, just as long as we know what it's for.
Mhm.
And what I'm looking at is if, the equity of the policy, right? If we're given 300 a month for meetings, and that's only 150 a meeting, and those meetings could be 3 or 4 hours. And then we're given $100 for open agenda review. So I would just say that there should still be the expectation that they're preparing for the meetings even beyond the review. And I would just add that
Agenda
to the
review
stipend.
and material
Yeah.
prep.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, I like it. What do you think?
I mean, I'm a party pooper. I'll just go with the group at this point. Like, I'm with the group. Cause I said $25 a meeting, so I'm a hot mess. So I will go. It was terrible. It was terrible. I was Scrooge McDuck. I was like, no. So I will go with the will of the group. I just want to ensure that we're being student focused and they can come out of this job, knowing that it was an actual job, and they can put it on their resumes and they can put it on their resumes, and then, what was that? They can put it on their resumes, and they can, I know, like, what was that, like Tarjay, like, you know, like Tarjay. But they can do it and know that they go into their next job with some skills. So that's just my biggest thing, is what skills are they gonna come
One
out
of
of
us
this
gonna go
with?
to interview and we're gonna say we're students and we're not gonna get the job because of
One final point is that as we name the stipend, we need to name that their attendance is required. Like if you miss a meeting,
Then it goes
then it
down,
goes
okay.
down.
Dr. Moses, could we ask you to make the change on the policy? Is that okay?
Yes.
And then, it should be, it's probably gonna be really short.
Yeah.
So I'm okay for it not to come back, because I know there's urgency to pay the current student trustees, so if it's okay with you, why don't we just, if you could send it to us to review,
And then we can
and
stamp
then
it.
we'll just, and hopefully we can put it forward to you.
Yeah, especially
Either.
the new trustees in January, because these trustees are already being paid.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so.
Cool.
So would this come into consent,
Um,
the language
you
change?
know,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, for the next meeting?
yeah.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
okay. Okay, great. Well, look at us. We have 20 minutes. Do we want to start number 7? Let me just look at it real quick. Yeah, it's one paragraph. Should we?
Is this in such update preservation of school-based art? I think we could do it.
Okay, everyone, let's move to number 7. Everybody's waiting. Okay, so, Dr. Harris, could you put it on the screen? I'll
Yes.
read the red section. Okay, so this comes from a situation that we had a couple years ago where out of a really positive intention of painting a school, which we all love when that happens, unfortunately, student murals that had been painted and done over 10 years got painted over, which created a lot of upsetness, not just with staff and students and community, but district. So we realized that we needed to include something in policy around in the future when something's happening, whether it's painting or installation of something, that we need to be thoughtful about what is already there, especially if it's student created. So I think that's well, I know that's where it came from. So I don't know if this is the right policy to add this to, but that's the intent. So we can discuss whether or not it should be here. But the added language would be any pre-authorized student, staff, or community installation, including but not limited to murals, plantings, garden or memorial trees. I don't know what that is. Memorials, tilings.
Yep. Any pre-authorized student, staff, or community installations, including but not limited to murals, plantings, memorials, tiling, sculptures shall not be removed from a WCCUSD property without the written approval of the district superintendent explaining the reasoning. The superintendent or chosen designee shall create and keep current the necessary administrative regulations to ensure a documented process, sign-off procedure, and permanent filing system exists. The administrative regulation may also include necessary notification language of WCCUSD board policy and appropriate vendor contracts. You're welcome, Fran.
Fantastic job. Okay, do we have any public comment on this item? I forgot that last one.
No public comment.
Okay, thank you. So first, I would like to discuss whether or not it should go in this policy. Maybe Ms. Mejia Hooper can help us.
Yes.
Do you think it should be in this policy, or do you believe it should be in a different one?
Well, I have concerns about the policy in general, because of the length of installations, and part of it is that said that it needed any pre-approved installation. But who's pre-approving installations, and what's the policy for that? And what do we do with all of our historic installations that may or may not have been pre-approved, but we have no idea if they were or not? You know, this is one of the more challenging things that we have on our school sites, because student art obviously is something we would like to encourage and have locations for, and it brings vibrance and life to the campuses. But it's very difficult as we move forward with different projects on the school site and the ramifications and cost that comes with trying to work around those installations. And so I caution the process. But I mean, I also encourage that we should have something in place, because it's something we're struggling, especially at Richmond and Kennedy. We have many installations of things that we have to decide what we're going to do with, and who is responsible for a history of a school site, whether it's, you know, alumni, whether it's current administration at the school, current administration at the district level. All of those components are swirling around in my world right at this moment in a very real way. And so I agree that a policy is important, because then at least there's a pathway for us to understand how to get from the point I am right now to a consensus that that's what we should be doing. But the part that's challenging is that we are in a moment in time. And when you're in a moment in time, you have to kind of deal with what happened previously. And what are you creating when you're bringing this forward? We have a hard time tracking our buildings, let alone every art installation on said buildings. And so this idea that there's going to be this magic historic record of all of these officially approved projects is a huge task. We have literally thousands of buildings over our 55 sites. And by the way, the same number of HVAC units. So it's a big thing, right? And so while I really encourage a policy being able to come forward, I also caution on the bureaucracy that might be created with said policy. And that's not really an answer maybe that you were looking for, but it is a reality of all of the things that we try to track in facilities, and adding another tracker of student involved projects would be huge.
Well, let me ask you a question then. I'm not even thinking about like rebuilding or, you know, like remodeling or whatever, right? Like, let's take the example of where the problem came from. A school is being painted, right? Like, what happens? What's the procedure potentially in order to preserve a mural? Like, is it right now that we don't, or that we wouldn't, or like what would be the trigger and what would be the steps in order to?
Normally, the project manager meets with the principal and talks about the murals on site and determines which ones need to be maintained and which ones do not. I will tell you that murals that are designed within a rectangle are much easier to repaint around than murals that have a less definitive edge, right? Murals that have one outside line versus, you know, 100 separate elements that are also have the base color separating them. It's extremely difficult to paint around that. And so then you have to make the choice of, do we leave it? But when we leave it, that paint, when you paint, if you leave an unpainted section of a building and then paint new next to it, if we've all painted one room in our house and then realized that the room next to it is suddenly very ugly looking, that is a reality, all right? Because when you paint next to sections of unpainted area, it's extremely obvious that one is very dingy and messy versus the stuff that's freshly painted. And so it causes this conflict that can come forward of, we want a bright, fresh, new building, which is part of the reason we paint. But another important reason we paint is it helps keep the integrity of the outside envelope of our buildings. And that's our absolute most important part of repainting. Obviously, the aesthetic is an added bonus. But repainting our buildings, especially our wood surfaces, are extremely important for maintaining the building. And so we have to keep that in mind. And so what we normally do is we talk with the principal and talk about murals on campus and have that discussion. It comes to a conclusion, and regretfully, there was no meeting minutes from said meeting, which is a new policy that I've established with my project managers. When we do a repainting project, that will occur, so that we can avoid this situation again, because there was a misunderstanding between the two about what the results of said meeting was. But that is what we typically do.
President, and then I'll move this way. President, Dr. Hurst, Dr. Johnson, no.
Is there a way that murals just go on removable panels? So every mural is put on a removable panel that when paint happens, take the panel down, and paint, put the panel back up. Not a clue if that's able to work, but just thinking in the idea of how to create, maintain, encourage artwork at our schools, and at the same time, not create a headache for facilities, and language of like, now and henceforth, all murals or paintings or student work has to be removable. However they want to be able to remove it, it has to be on something that facilities or maintenance or whoever will be able to remove and encourage whatever.
Speak to that. Apple did a modernization at Siege, and they did, all of the indoor murals were on panels. But the outdoor murals were not on panels, and they got painted over. But they got painted over because there was graffiti. I mean, so I just wanted to look that to say, sure, it's possible and it's beautiful, and the ones that are on panels are maintained. But outdoors, it would be difficult, I think.
So the hard part about removable panels is when you're mounting things to the wall. And depending on what you're mounting to the wall and what kind of wall it is, that would technically be required for DSA approval, which would make a project much more expensive than you would ever want it to be.
If you add those removable panels inside a building or outside.
It depends on what it is. It depends on how much weight it is, but there are requirements when you are mounting things on a wall. It also depends on how large it is, right? So there's scale here. That's an issue, but panels can add their challenges of their own. I would definitely encourage, if possible, that all murals are linear, because that actually is a really awesome way of us being able to paint around them very easily versus not being able to paint around them very easily.
Got it. Dr. Hurst, Dr. Johnson.
Yeah, I was gonna share, there is a version of a policy or draft policy that was sent to me by Harold. And this is from another district, but he really made it ours. And it covers procedures for submission of a proposal for a mural. It also covers criteria for proposals, placement of the mural, maintenance of the mural, damage or vandalism to the mural, removal of the mural as well. But I also had him add the makeup of the committee, because remember there was an issue around that particular school not involving the appropriate people in this committee to make these decisions. So I actually put in here, the principal will establish a review committee. The committee will be the principal, certificated, classified student, and members of the local district community. So I just sent it to both of you. If you would like, we could bring this policy back to the governance committee.
Yeah, let's do that. Listen, I do think that there's a lot of problems with this paragraph. I mean, I think that it'd be really almost impossible for you to have to personally go and review every single project too.
Yeah.
Right? Especially if we're painting 10 schools in June, right? Like, or whatever, like, how do we do that? So yes, why don't we, look at that policy in our December meeting?
Okay.
Dr. Johnson?
Yeah, I want to say I appreciate Ellen's conversation, but the real intent behind this was that one person made a decision that impacted an entire community. So we need something in place so it doesn't occur again.
Mhm, mhm.
Can I say
think
something
this
else,
policy
the
does
last
that.
thing?
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
Ms. Laurie, how can we implement technology? How can we implement technology in this to where we throwing up a mural that changes? Because we have at baby showers now, they have it to where they off a screen or they project something, right? And then it just changes or whatever. Then it's no harm to the building. We just throwing it up on the wall. I don't know, but I'm just thinking, I'm trying to be technology based now. I'm just thinking about what does that look like in our art and our backup, right? What does it look like if we're doing fifth grade art? Because then it stores, right? Then this little thing, it has storage. Then it's oh, look, the 1995 kids are coming back and now their art is up here. The 2015 kids are coming back and it's we can show their art through.
Sounds like you're gonna have great questions for your new committee.
I'm not doing it. So that's just a way of trying to blend these both worlds. And maybe it's just a way of kind of thinking outside the box, or when we're doing things at a brand new school, how do we implement something like that just to see if it works? Or just to say, because we do want art, but we do want to protect our buildings because it is a financial cost. I'm complete.
Did you want to respond?
I mean, I love the idea, but I'll be honest, when you said it, all I saw was dollar signs.
No, that's expensive too. I got it.
Yeah.
I got it. Sorry.
Okay, well, thank you for engaging in the conversation. Let's just look at the policy in December. Dr. Arce, if you could also send it to facilities, I think that it'd be great for you guys to review it. And we'll go from there. Any last thoughts before we move on?
Just gonna combine your idea as well, like when we have a mural and we need to paint over it, oftentimes if you just take a picture and then hang that picture, it still recognizes the work that was there before and the historic element. I mean, if we were just at Downer and we were able to see this beautiful display of, the story of the building and the story of the community, and so that could be another way to memorialize the work of students.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I don't know if this policy still exists, Ellen might know, but I remember wanting to create a mural at one of my schools years ago, and I had to apply to facilities to say, can I paint this mural? So just thinking ahead, that we might have a way to, document what's where, before we enter into any new projects, and re-implement that policy.
Yeah.
And that's covered in this proposal as
Got
well, this policy.
That's a very important thing, because beyond the facility implications, there are content implications of what goes on our buildings. And while I do not want to step in that conversation at all, I will talk about paint rectal linearity. That is an important part of also what shows up on our buildings.
Plus, it might be just a really good exercise for us to go through this and bring something forward so that administrators also are understanding of, what needs to happen. I walked into a school for a site visit and there was 2 classrooms just painting a wall. I'm not gonna tell you which school, 'cause you're gonna freak out. And they were doing this beautiful ocean scenery. Some of the jellyfish did not look appropriate, which is what caught my eye. But then, I realized that they probably did not ask anyone for any type of approval for the painting, who bought the paint, where it came from, all these questions started coming to I left it, but I think having a policy review it and then also having a conversation with all of our administrators about it might open, some
And what type of
Good
paint did they use? Because are they using high quality paint? Are they using paint that they just got at the store? Does that paint have lead in it? Does that paint have,
Stressful.
you know what I
Yeah.
mean? But like, oh,
I know, I know.
but not lead, but does that paint have something that, but I guess my point is, if it's filtered through an office that has a checklist, like you have to do boop, 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 and boop, it gives us more coverage to being seamless with this thing. But that does add another layer to facilities, because somebody has to look at it, somebody has to say yes to it, somebody has to approve the paint and how somebody's working on it. And then that's the liability of what if you have parents come out there and paint a mural and somebody fall?
Right.
Or
There's
something
also
happens.
paint on the walls, but there's also paint on the ground, and that definitely
Yeah.
exists in many of our schools.
And we're just talking about art, we did not talk about the memorializing of trees, because then somebody gotta water it, somebody gotta plant it, somebody has to maintain it, somebody to make sure they're not hitting a pipe when they plant the tree, so, yeah. Oh, look.
And then I'll also add that with the inappropriate comment, we also have board policies in regards to drawings, so.
I should call that a
If-
kindergartner.
So if it is inappropriate, then it should go through the principal in order for them to sign off and say, okay, this is appropriate to go up, on school property, because then if parents come on property, students, personnel, they may be offended from what's on there, and then district will have to investigate that content.
And then what do we consider to be appropriate? If I'm painting a natural scene of native Californians, and then someone doesn't have a shirt on, a male figure doesn't have a shirt on, or if I'm painting a scene in the world history class, and I wanna paint a natural scene that takes place in the Serengeti, or this, or, you know, are we painting, it's like, are we putting pants on cartoon characters, right? Or are we just leaving off the genitalia if we paint a zebra, right? Because a kid's gonna put the genitalia in because it's funny. So then what does that look like, and how do we approach that? Good point, glad you're here. Put him on the committee.
Our third committee member.
Yeah, put him on the committee.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Great conversations. We actually got through 7 items, which I didn't think we were going to get through. We do have next meeting, items that we didn't discuss, school climate literacy resolution. Mr. Christopher Proskus, please look that one through. It's much bigger than what I was expecting we were going to get. Anyways, you're gonna have fun with that one. Then one of our student trustees asked us to agendize a student bill of rights idea. He doesn't have content yet, but he wants to like talk to us about like what would that look like. And then we're gonna bring back the COLA conversation, if you remember, Dr. Moses. And then we have obviously some more policies on our waiting list. We're going to agendize our next meeting, hopefully in the next few days, to make sure that everybody can put it on their calendar. We'll work with Rosa and assist on that.
And I think we had one.
Yes.
Yes, sorry.
So we have a draft enrollment and transfer policy that needed to be updated. Our enrollment will start in January, so we
need to have it for the next meeting for sure.
Yes.
Okay, we'll prioritize that one.
Okay.
If you can remember, Dr. Hurst.
Yeah.
I'm writing it down too.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, any last thoughts before we end the meeting?
Great
I know it's
meeting.
late. Thank you everyone for being here. Really appreciate it.
Maybe in
I adjourn us at
September.
right 8 o'clock. Thank you.
That was a great meeting. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.